Chapter 355. Go to Kanwang. The two of them laughed for a while before Li Yundong held back his laughter and helped the girl sit up. He said, Okay, stop it. Tell me, what do you want me to do? Su Chan snorted like a general who had returned to the court after a victory. She said proudly, Didn't the famous Zhenren Li also beg for mercy from me? Li Yundong smiled and said, Yes, Lord Fox Immortal. Please tell me quickly. I will do as you say. Su Chan said with a smile, Just close your eyes. Li Yundong closed his eyes curiously and puzzled. Before long, he felt a burst of cold air coming into his mouth. This yin qi immediately stimulated the yang qi in his body. Li Yundong felt that if he didn't control it, the yang qi would automatically flow out with the yin qi. Go to Kanwang. 7K. Oath M. This went on for less than a minute. Su Chan suddenly smiled and said, Okay. Li Yundong opened his eyes and saw that Su Chan's face was glowing. Her skin was so delicate that it seemed to be shining. Li Yundong asked curiously, Wow, did you eat ginseng fruit? Did you regain your youth? Su Chan said with a smile, Bah, you're old. I only absorbed a little bit of your yang qi. Is the change obvious? Li Yundong looked Su Chan up and down and said in amazement, Yes, the change is obvious. You can be a spokesperson for cosmetics. Who wants you to be a spokesperson? Wow, that product must be very popular. Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, Really? Can you make a lot of money? Li Yundong saw that she was really interested, so he quickly said, No, you are my girl. How can you step into the entertainment circle? The water in the entertainment circle is too muddy. How can I let you step into it? No, absolutely not. Su Chan was just saying it casually. Seeing that Li Yundong strongly opposed it, she didn't insist. She smiled and said, Well, I'll listen to my master. Li Yundong reached out to pinch Su Chan's cheek with a smile. As soon as his hand touched it, he immediately bounced it away and said in an extremely exaggerated tone, Wow, it's so elastic. Su Chan couldn't stop giggling at his teasing. You're so mean. Li Yundong smiled and said, The change is quite big, but I feel that you didn't absorb much yang qi. Why did you change so quickly? Su Chan sighed softly and said, This is the power of us demon cultivators. Yundong, do you know what dual cultivation is? Li Yundong thought about the ancient books he had read and said, I used to think that it was the qi refining kung fu that men and women carried out when they were having sex, but later I learned that in fact, double cultivation also includes double cultivation of life and spirit, as well as double cultivation of Buddhism and Taoism. Double cultivation of Buddhism and Taoism at the same time does not only refer to double cultivation when men and women are having sex. When it came to cultivation, Su Chan was no longer her usual cheerful self. She said softly, You're right, but in fact, dual cultivation is a very complicated and dangerous thing. When men and women are having sex, they often can't control their emotions. How can they control their own aura calmly? Once they can't control their own aura, their spirit will be unstable, causing the aura of the weak to flow to the strong, causing one side to suffer a great loss and the other side to benefit greatly. Li Yundong also nodded and said, You're right. I remember that Zi Yuan once said that cultivation is extremely scientific. It can never create energy out of thin air. Even cultivation has to abide by the law of conservation of energy. It's almost impossible for two people to increase their strength at the same time after dual cultivation. This principle is the same as playing mahjong. Whether it's two people playing mahjong together or four people playing mahjong together, it's impossible for two parties to win at the same time, or four parties to win at the same time. One party must lose, and one party must pay. Su Chan looked at Li Yundong and said with envy and admiration, Yundong, you're really smart. You can draw inferences about other things from one instance. You're right. Many Taoist priests pay attention to sexual techniques, which are actually the way of collecting nourishment. In their eyes, women are just medicinal materials and cauldrons, so they never care about their lives. However, this method is really effective, especially after the death of the first leader of the Fox Zen school and the succession of the second leader. At that time, as soon as the pillar of the Fox Zen school passed away, the power of the Fox Zen school was greatly weakened and surrounded by enemies. Therefore, the second leader wanted to quickly improve her strength. At that time, she heard that the Yin Yang sect of Mount Wuhua had a successful dual cultivation kung fu, So she sneaked into Mount Wuhua and pretended to be a female disciple, secretly learning this kung fu. Speaking of this, Su Chan sighed faintly and said, after the second leader learned this kung fu, she immediately passed it on to her disciples as if she had found a treasure. As a result, almost everyone in the Fox Zen school practiced dual cultivation, and all of them went to the mortal world to find a man with yuan-yang body to collect yang to supplement yin. In the end, they made the world a mess, making many cultivators think that we are born to be lascivious. Li Jiandong said curiously, but I've been dealing with you for a long time. Whether it's your master Ao Wushuang, Chao Yi or the others, I've seen that although they all have coquettish faces and romantic figures, they are quite dignified and chaste, and have not done anything dissolute. Su Chan said, that's because after the second and third generation leaders of the Fox Zen school, the fourth generation leader, the mystical Silver Fox, took over the position of leader. At this time, the Fox Zen school was already notorious. It was like a rat crossing the street, being beaten and killed by cultivators. The most terrible thing was that the cultivators of the Fox Zen school found that once their Naiden, which had been cultivated by collecting yang to supplement yin, met the Naiden of the orthodox Shen men, it almost collapsed at the first touch. At this time, the mystical Silver Fox summed up the experience and lessons of the previous two generations of leaders. She believed that although the way of dual cultivation was successful, it lacked tempering and polishing. It was opportunistic and not enough to be the right way. Therefore, she abandoned the kung fu of dual cultivation and turned into an ordinary female disciple. She devoted herself to the Taoists and secretly learned the kung fu of the orthodox Shen men. However, the kung fu of the way of dual cultivation was too easy to master. It was really a little unbearable to abandon it all at once, so the mystical Silver Fox improved it. From the physical copulation of a man and a woman to the breathing of a man and a woman, the dual cultivation has since been divided into major dual cultivation and minor dual cultivation, Su Chan said with confidence. In a few words, she clearly explained the reason for the major and minor dual cultivation. She said, in this way, the disciples of the Fox Zen school don't have to risk the world's condemnation to do the harmful thing of collecting yang to supplement yin. Yundong, you also know that if the major dual cultivation is done too much, people will be squeezed into jerky. As the saying goes, lust is a bone-scraping knife. This is exactly the reason. Li Yundong laughed and said, I understand. This is actually the same as the 8 cycles of fire cultivation technique I practice. My 8 cycles of fire cultivation technique also combines the qi of heart fire with the qi of kidney water in my body, and the yang qi of the right kidney with the yin qi of the left kidney. Therefore I refine the supreme yin qi from the pure yang qi, and my cultivation quotient jumped from yin spirit to yang spirit. Your spirit dual cultivation also combines the yin and yang qi, and then stimulates the Naiden in your body to grow and mature, right? Li Yundong said with a smile. Su Chan nodded with a smile and said, yes, the mystical Silver Fox has modified the major dual cultivation into a minor one. Although the effect is not so obvious, it is much safer. At least, both men and women don't have to be afraid of being picked clean by each other, and they can control their own aura. Li Yundong held Su Chan in his arms and said with a smile, then shall we have a small dual cultivation every day? Su Chan quickly waved her hand and said in a panic, no, absolutely not. Li Yundong asked curiously, why not? Look, you've only absorbed a little bit of my yang qi, and you've changed so much. If you absorb a little more, you'll directly become an immortal. Su Chan shook her head like a rattle drum. She said, no. As the saying goes, dripping water wears through a stone, and rope saws wood. Today, I absorbed a little of your yuan-yang zhenqi, which is the purest and most essential thing in your body. It's very difficult to cultivate. If I absorb a little, you will lose a little. As the saying goes, the way of heaven is to lose excess and make up for deficiency. It only takes a few seconds for a man to lose his primordial essence, but it will take several days to make up for it. In the same way, the speed at which you lose your zhenqi will not be as fast as the speed at which you make up for it. In the long run, your cultivation will definitely regress greatly. Li Yundong didn't take it seriously and said with a smile, what does it matter? As long as my girl is strong, isn't that enough? Su Chan was moved. She hugged Li Yundong and said softly, sir, I appreciate your kindness. You can't spoil me like this. It's not good. Think about it, if it was too easy for me to get the kung fu I'm cultivating now, then I wouldn't have worked hard to cultivate. A Naiden without hard work is a fake Naiden. When I meet a master, it will collapse at once. Even if I cultivate Niden to become extremely powerful through small dual cultivation, it's still useless when I meet a master. He sighed and said, "You're right. I remember that after I succeeded in the Xueqi phase in the Himalayas, I met Wu Hao. He had obtained the Niden through yin-yang dual cultivation. As a result, I spat out a mouthful of zhenqi, causing the 5-yang blood pearl to reverse, but his zhenqi couldn't blow it at all. Why was there such a big difference between the same mouthful of zhenqi? It's because my Niden was tempered thousands of times, while his was a man and woman dual cultivation. It's like on one hand, there are veterans who have been through hundreds of battles, and on the other hand, there are old soldiers who are content to enjoy themselves. Although they are both soldiers and can fight with guns, once the bayonet is red, the difference between the two is too big." As Li Yundong spoke, he lowered his head and looked at Su Chan with appreciation and love on his face. He gently stroked her head and said, "Well, my girl is really sensible. She really knows how to improve herself. Good." After receiving Li Yundong's praise, Su Chan's heart was sweeter than honey. She nodded with a smile and said, "Well, I will work hard. When my zhenqi is strong and vigorous, I will ask you to teach me the heavenly Jin Dan technique." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Okay." But in his heart, he thought, cultivation is about accumulation over time. When Su Chan's zhenqi and nigong are cultivated well, I'm afraid it will be too late. No, I have to think of another wage. It's a pity that I've already eaten the Renyuan Jindan, and the other Renyuan Jindan is still missing. However, the Medicine King tripod that Zi Yuan mentioned before is indeed a good treasure. But I don't know where it is, and I don't know how to refine pills. Li Yundong thought for a while, but he couldn't figure it out, so he put the idea to the back of his mind for the time being. He just remembered it in his heart. At dawn the next day, Zhou Qin knocked on Li Yundong's door early in the morning. Li Yundong opened the door and saw that Zhou Qin was dressed in a student's uniform. Ruan Hongling was standing next to her, also dressed in a student's uniform. He asked curiously, "What are you dressed for?" Ruan Hongling laughed and said to Zhou Qin, "I knew it. This guy must have forgotten his other identity, right?" Zhou Qin pursed her lips and smiled. "Master, don't tell me you've forgotten that you still have to go to school? You've been absent for many days, and so have I. If I don't go to class, I'll be disqualified." Li Yundong patted his forehead and said with a smile, "If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten. Wait a minute. I'll go out in a minute." After washing up, he was about to go out with Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling. Su Chan saw him at a glance and jumped over, saying with a smile, "Are you going to school? I want to go too." As soon as she said this, the other little foxes also joined in. "Leader, we want to go too." When Li Yundong saw this, he immediately felt a headache coming on. He thought to himself, "Last time, you almost turned the school upside down. Are you going again this time? How can this be? Do you think I'm going on a spring outing?" Chapter 356. Go to watch net. Li Yundong said with a straight face, "No, do you think I'm going out to play?" Su Chan looked at Li Yundong eagerly, pouted, and said, "Didn't you say that I should follow you closely in the future?" The little foxes also joined in and said, "Yes, we must not leave leader's side and follow him closely." Li Yundong scolded them with a smile. "Are you a group of female ghosts? Follow me closely. Go do what you need to do. Don't make trouble." How could the little foxes be willing to do that? They all jeered, "Leader, you can't keep your word. Leader, you can't treat everyone equally." Li Yundong felt as if there were countless bees buzzing in his head. Chao Yi, who was beside him, also persuaded with a smile. "Leader, take them out for a walk. They are looking forward to going out with you. Go to watch net." 7K. O.M. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Sherbua Chao Yi, why are you also jeering?" The little foxes cheered. "Long live Sherbua Chao Yi. Long live Sherbua Chao Yi." Chao Yi coughed dryly and glanced at Li Yundong. The little foxes immediately understood and said in unison, "Long live leader. Long live leader." With so many beautiful women begging for mercy, Li Yundong couldn't stand it anymore. He said helplessly, "Okay, but we have to make 3 rules before we go out." When the little foxes heard this, they all laughed and said, "What 3 rules?" Li Yundong raised 3 fingers and said, First, don't make a scene. As soon as he finished speaking, the little foxes said in unison, "What do you mean by making a scene?" Li Yundong glared at them and said, "This is making a scene." The little foxes were shocked and all shut up. Li Yundong nodded with satisfaction and said, "Second, don't run around." The little foxes had no objection to this rule and nodded in unison. Li Yundong added, "Third, don't call me leader outside." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately asked, "Then what should we call you?" Li Yundong thought for a moment, then said resolutely, "Pretend you don't know me." Hearing this, Su Chan giggled and said, "After what happened last time, it seems unlikely." Li Yundong knew that Su Chan was referring to the speech he gave at the university. "How dare you?" he said, glaring at Su Chan. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Anyway, don't call me leader if you have nothing to do. It's not a costume film. It sounds weird to outsiders. If there's anything, just call me by my name." The little foxes looked at each other and nodded. "All right then." Li Yundong saw that although they were well behaved at this time, he felt strange in his heart, as if something was going to happen. However, words that had been said were like spilled water, and they could not be taken back. Li Yundong sighed. "Forget it, let's go. I don't know what I did in my last life to provoke such a large group of people like you." When everyone in the Fox Zen school heard this, they all laughed. At this time, Zi Yuan also came in from the opposite door. Seeing that he was about to go out, she asked curiously, "Where are you going?" "You have to go to the store to work on the decoration today." Li Yundong said with a wry smile, "I can't split myself up. Why don't I leave the decoration to you? It's useless for me to go. I don't know anything about this." Zi Yuan thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, that's it." Seeing this, Xueqi took the initiative to say, "Zhenren Zi Yuan, why don't I help you?" Zi Yuan glanced at Xueqi and was a little surprised, but she still smiled and said, "Well, I can't do it alone." At this time, Lu Yuehong and Zhuang Yiting of the Fox Zen School said in unison, "Then let's go and help." Li Yundong smiled and said, "That's good. Everyone has something to do. Let's divide the work and cooperate." The group of people laughed. Li Yundong took Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and the little foxes to the school, while Zi Yuan and the others went to the store to work on the decoration. When he arrived at the school, Li Yundong looked at the vibrant campus. He suddenly felt that the place he had stayed in for nearly 3 years was so strange. He sighed and said, "I haven't been back for a while. It seems like a century has passed. I've almost forgotten that I'm still a student." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly heard a voice next to him, with anger and surprise. "You've almost forgotten that you're a student. Have you also forgotten that you have friends like us?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw Feng Na holding a textbook in her arms, looking at him with a mixture of anger and joy. Li Yundong immediately laughed and said, "It's you. Long time no see. How have you been recently?" Feng Na glanced at Li Yundong and said in a drawling tone, "Me? Do you still know me?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Yes, yes. You are the wise and powerful president of the student union of our school." As he said this, Li Yundong said with a smile, "President, long time no see. Are you busy every day?" Feng Na snorted and rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. She said with a little girl's temper, "I'm busy every day, but I can't be compared to some people who are so busy that they can't even be seen. I'm not busy at all. I just go to school and attend meetings every day." Li Yundong smiled even more eagerly and said, "Don't say that, President. You have to take care of yourself. Going to school and attending meetings is very tiring." The more Feng Na talked to Li Yundong, the more she smiled. When she heard this, she couldn't help but burst into laughter and scolded him with a smile. "Hey, what have you been doing these days? Why haven't I seen you? Sunli has come to me several times. She said that if you don't go to class, you'll have to take a makeup exam again." Li Yundong sighed with a deep look on his face. Feng Na asked curiously and with concern, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Tell me what's on your mind. If you don't say it, do you not regard me as a friend?" Li Yundong looked up at the sky and sighed. "Alas, these days, I can't eat or sleep well when I think about something. I can't sleep. I'm so anxious." His words made Ruan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and Su Chan come over curiously and ask, "Li Yundong, what are you thinking about? Do you have to be so exaggerated? Yundong, what are you thinking about? Tell us, we can help you share some of the burden. Ma. Li Yundong, what's on your mind? Li Yundong glanced at them and sighed. Alas, you can't help me. Don't ask. After that he sighed. But the more Li Yundong didn't say anything, the more curious they became. They all urged him, say it, say it. There are no outsiders here. Li Yundong couldn't resist, so he sighed and said with a compassionate expression, every night, as long as I think about the fact that the motherland has not been unified and the world has not been peaceful, I can't eat or sleep well. Before he could finish his words, everyone burst into laughter. Feng Na laughed and spat. Bah, have you been busy saving world peace these days? Su Chan giggled, but didn't say anything. Zhou Qin covered her mouth and didn't interrupt. Only Wan Hongling laughed and scolded. Li Yundong, you are too thick-skinned. Her voice was clear, and as soon as it came out, it immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding students. When many people heard Li Yundong's name, their ears suddenly pricked up. Li Yundong? Where is he? Is he the Li Yundong who no one knows and has been wandering around Tiannan in vain? Damn, Zhenren Li, I can't believe I saw him in person in this school. Am I hallucinating? Fellow Taoist, you're not hallucinating. This is the legend of our school, Li Yundong Zhenren Li, who is known as a pear blossom suppressing a begonia, and who is against eating shit without hesitation. These students whispered to each other for a while, and some of them simply shouted at Li Yundong, Li Yundong, fuck you. These students, who had experienced the last incident in the school playground, all laughed. Li Yundong was not angry. He turned his head and said to Feng Na and the others with a wry smile, hurry up and go to the classroom. It's going to be crowded here. Sure enough, after a while, the news of Li Yundong's appearance on the campus spread, and in a short time, it had spread all over the campus. Many people who had never seen Li Yundong before were curious. I've heard his name so much that my ears have become calloused. I've seen all kinds of photos and videos on the forum, but I've never seen him in person. Let's go and have a look. For a moment, these students all clustered around Li Yundong and followed him. The large group of people was like a torrent. Li Yundong smiled bitterly to himself. He turned his head to look at Feng Na and said, do you know why I don't come to school anymore? Feng Na covered her mouth and said with a smile, that's because you don't come often, so when the students see you, they find it strange and come to see you in person. Li Yundong laughed exaggeratedly and said, oh, so they usually look at my body, don't they? Feng Na laughed. She patted Li Yundong on the shoulder and said, I happen to have no classes this morning. I'll accompany you to a class. Li Yundong laughed and said, I think you just want to see me have a good time. Feng Na giggled. You found out. Well, I just want to see you have a good time. What do you think? Are you going to drive me away? Li Yundong sighed and said, alas, I'm such a low-key person, but you just have to applaud and scream for me. It's really embarrassing. After that, the people around him burst into laughter again. The little foxes had been looking at the people around them curiously. They quietly pulled Su Chan's arm, pulled her aside, and whispered, Su Chan, is leader so prestigious here? Su Chan said proudly, of course. Didn't you see how many people responded to his call on the stage last time? Only then did the little foxes remember what had happened last time. They said with pride, it's a good thing that leader is so popular. It means that our leader is very outstanding. It seems that our Fox Zen school will definitely flourish in his hands in the future. Su Chan nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Yes, Yundong has always been outstanding. Li Yundong saw that Su Chan and the little foxes were whispering to each other, and he suddenly had an idea. He quickly called Su Chan over and asked as if he was facing a formidable enemy. Hey, what are you talking about? You're not going to do something again, are you? Su Chan immediately cried out in grievance. I didn't. We were just praising you just now, okay? Li Yundong looked suspicious and kept looking at Su Chan, as if he wanted to find some clues from her face. He said doubtfully, really? Su Chan said firmly, of course not. You're thinking too much. Li Yundong patted her head and said, that's good. I was afraid that you guys would get together and cause me trouble. You guys are a group of troublemakers. Su Chan pouted and made a face at Li Yundong. At this time, Feng Na turned her wrist to look at her watch and said, let's go. It's time for class. We have a big classical class this morning. Li Yundong saw that there were so many students around that there were signs of traffic congestion. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Let's go and grab seats." Chapter 357. Go to watch net. A group of people came to the classroom and grabbed a large number of seats in the back row. After Li Yundong sat down, he suddenly found that Ruan Hongling was also sitting in the back row. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Why did you come to this kind of class? Aren't you a freshman?" Ruan Hongling said slowly, "I always felt that something was going to happen to you, so I came to watch the fun." Go to watch net. 7K. O.M. Li Yundong was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. He rolled his eyes at Ruan Hongling and then said to the little foxes sitting in the back row, "If you dare to make trouble, no one is allowed to have dinner when we go back." The little foxes were shocked and sat up straight, their mouths tightly shut. Feng Na had always been curious about the relationship between so many beautiful women and Li Yundong. Seeing that these beautiful women were extremely obedient as soon as Li Yundong spoke, she couldn't help but ask, "Li Yundong, have you been selling human beings these days? Where did you get so many beautiful women? You can open a modeling company now." Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. "I'm so charming that they threw themselves at me." Feng Na refused to believe him, so she turned to the little foxes and asked, "What's your relationship with him?" The little foxes were so frightened by Li Yundong that they didn't dare to speak. They all shook their heads like a rattle. Seeing them shake their heads, Feng Na thought that they didn't dare to say anything. She felt sour in her heart and said resentfully, "If you don't want to say it, then don't say it." Li Yundong, you are too much of a playboy, aren't you?" Li Yundong coughed twice and thought to himself, "Playboy, have you ever seen a virgin like me?" He didn't want to continue talking about this topic with Feng Na. At this time the teacher also came in, so he quickly changed the topic and said, "The teacher is here. Let's start the class." Feng Na burst into laughter and said, "Go to class my ass. Did you bring your textbooks? No, right? Where's the notebook? No, right? Where's the pen?" Li Yundong smiled embarrassedly and said, "Mr. President, please be merciful. It's time for class. Don't you see that the classroom is full?" Only then did Feng Na notice that the large classroom was already full of people. Even the aisle was full of people. She was shocked. "Why are there so many people?" Li Yundong also smiled and said, "If we sell standing tickets, I'm afraid we can make a fortune." Feng Na laughed and said, "You can earn quite a lot from selling tickets. However, I reckon that most of them are here for you." Li Yundong looked around and saw that many people were looking at him. He couldn't help but smile and say, "If one day I can't survive, I'll open an exhibition hall myself. I won't starve to death." Feng Na covered her mouth and giggled. "That's great. Remember to call me along. I'll help you collect the tickets and do some publicity." Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He thought, "By the way, Feng Na can come and help me open the tea room. Should I tell her?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and thought to himself, "Let's talk about it later. What if I lose money then? Wouldn't that be utterly humiliating?" At this time, the teacher who walked into the classroom was also shocked by the students in the classroom. He couldn't help but get excited. "I've been teaching for so many years. When has it not been sparse, and many students have run away in the middle of the class? Since when are there so many people? Today, there are really no empty seats. What is happiness? Happiness is that cats eat fish, dogs eat meat, and Ultraman fights monsters every day. Isn't the teacher's happiness counting on the students in the classroom to listen to his class every day?" The teacher of the classical class was surnamed Hua. He was an old pedant with a head full of gray hair. He was so excited that his blood was boiling, as if his youth, which he hadn't seen for many years, had returned to his body. Mr. Hua coughed on the podium and said excitedly, "Students, let's start the class now." The students under the podium were chattering and whispering, as if they hadn't seen him at all. Mr. Hua was suddenly in a difficult position. He looked embarrassed and said a little louder, "Students, it's time to start the class." But the voices below did not diminish. Instead, they became louder. Mr. Hua could hear them clearly from above. Some of the girls were chattering and saying, "Hey, which one is Li Yundong? Well, there's the 10th person in the back row. Can't you recognize him? He's so easy to recognize. He's sitting in the middle of a group of beautiful women. Ah, it's true. This time, I finally saw him in person. Last time, I didn't see him clearly on the rostrum, but I heard that he objected to us eating sh** teeth. Bah, you're the one eating sh** tea. Mr. Hua was very depressed. He thought to himself, it turns out that so many students aren't here for my class, are they? Are they all here for Li Yundong? Isn't this too hurtful? Mr. Hua felt as if someone had poured a basin of cold water on the enthusiasm in his heart. His heart was cold, but on second thought, he thought, no, what is a teacher for? Isn't it just to educate students? The more it is like this, the more I have to educate these students. Mr. Hua regained his confidence on the podium and thought to himself, I don't believe that the content of my lecture can't attract you. Ignoring the noise under the podium, he began to teach with a wireless microphone. The sound of the lecture was loud and piercing, making the students grimace. They covered their ears and said one after another, F***CK, is the teacher on drugs or cheating today? Why is he speaking so loudly? Immediately, a student shouted, Teacher, your voice is too loud. We can't stand it. Mr. Hua said leisurely on the podium, if I don't speak louder, how can I cover you? The students under the podium burst into laughter. After a while, the order in the classroom was much better. Seeing this, Mr. Hua immediately became energetic. He tried his best to teach on the podium, but his words were extravagant and his saliva was flying everywhere. Li Yundong didn't want to listen to the lecture. He just wanted to be there so that he wouldn't be expelled if he skipped classes too many times. That would be a great injustice. Being expelled was a small matter. At that time, his parents' monthly benefits would be cut off, and he hadn't earned a single grain of rice. If he lost money in his business, there would be no way out. He would really have to take the little foxes to open a circus. Li Yundong was listening in his seat, but it was the first time the little foxes had attended such a class. They were very excited and sat upright, just like they were attending an old teacher's class in a private school. Mr. Hua looked down from the podium. He could see clearly who was listening carefully, who was whispering, who was putting on makeup, and who was texting. He thought to himself, it's rare that these girls are so beautiful and so serious in class. It's rare. Mr. Hua seemed to be encouraged. He spoke more and more energetically. When he got to the point where he was excited, he would casually recite poems and shake his head. He really had the air of an old teacher in a private school. Even though Su Chan had attended a few similar classes with Li Yundong, she had always envied him for being able to attend such a big school. She paid close attention to the class, especially when the teacher stood on the podium and began to talk about the relationship between ancient literati and flowers. She listened with great interest. She listened to the class with great interest. Seeing that Su Chan was listening so attentively, Li Yundong smiled and nudged her arm with his elbow. Hey, is it really that good? Su Chan giggled. It's good. It's very eye-opening. At this time, the teacher on the podium was talking about the relationship between scholars and chrysanthemums. When he talked about the works of Tao Yuanming, Lu Yu, and other famous writers, he simply shook his head and recited a poem. The autumn silk lingers around the house like the Tao family, all around the fence is slanting day by day. It is not that the chrysanthemum is preferred among flowers, but that when the flower blooms, there will be no more flowers. Li Yundong listened to the teacher recite the poem enthusiastically, and suddenly laughed. He said to Su Chan with a smirk, by the way, do you know why scholars like to sing about chrysanthemums? Of course I do, Su Chan said confidently. Do you think that your girl is uncultured? Chrysanthemums are fresh and elegant, noble and pure, the flower of a gentleman. Therefore, ancient scholars used chrysanthemums as a metaphor to show their nobility and the heart of a gentleman. Li Yundong shook his head with a smirk. No, that's nonsense. Su Chan's mouth opened wide. Ha! She asked in confusion. That's not right. What kind of reason is that? Li Yundong laughed. Why do scholars like chrysanthemums? Su Chan blinked. Why? Li Yundong said word by word in a serious tone, because they are all hardcore. As soon as Li Yundong finished speaking, Feng Na couldn't help but burst out laughing. As soon as she laughed out loud, she immediately felt that it was inappropriate. She quickly covered her mouth, turned her head to the side, and held back her laughter, her shoulders shrugging. Li Yundong ridiculed her with a fake smile. Feng Na, you actually understand? You have a heavy taste. Feng Na laughed until her stomach hurt. She didn't care about Li Yundong's words. Su Chan was confused. She stared blankly and kept thinking about Li Yundong's words. Why do scholars like chrysanthemums have a heavy taste? What kind of logic is this? Feng Na's previous laughter was very abrupt in the classroom, and Mr. Hua, who was on the podium, was very unhappy. He thought to himself, "Girl, why are you so unruly in class? Look at the girls behind you. How obedient they are." Mr. Hua was unhappy. After reciting the chrysanthemum poem, he asked, "Does anyone know whose poem I just recited? What's its name?" Many of the students under the podium peeked at Li Yundong and the beauties beside him from time to time. Some of them were catching up on sleep, some were playing with their mobile phones, and some were putting on makeup. Only a few of them were listening to the class. For a moment, the classroom was quiet. Almost everyone looked at each other. In addition, the poem was relatively obscure, so no one knew where it came from. Mr. Hua snorted and thought to himself, "You guys are not good students if you don't listen carefully in class. Look at the ones behind you, who are so serious. At first glance, you can tell that they are good students. They must know." After that, Mr. Hua pointed to the little foxes in the back row and said, "The fifth student from the right in the back row, stand up." Li Yundong was stunned. He looked back and saw that the fifth student from the right in the back row was a little fox from the Fox Zen school. The little fox looked at Li Yundong first, then stood up in confusion and looked at the teacher blankly. Mr. Hua asked kindly, "Student, do you know the source of this poem?" The little fox thought to herself, "I know, but leader didn't let us talk before." So she shook her head. Mr. Hua was greatly shocked. He looked depressed and pointed to the little fox next to him. "What about you? Do you know?" Another little fox also stood up. She saw that her Xueqi hadn't spoken before, so of course she couldn't speak either. She also shook her head in silence. Mr. Hua was depressed. He didn't believe it, so he called up the little foxes next to them one by one. As a result, all of them shook their heads in silence. Mr. Hua was angry and couldn't help shouting, "Why don't you know anything? How are you in class? Look at all of you, each and every one of you is so pretty, but why is your head so empty?" The little foxes felt wronged and thought to themselves, "We're not your students. We know, but leader won't let us say it." Mr. Hua was so angry on the podium that he was gasping for breath. Su Chan secretly felt that it was unfair. She thought to herself, "This teacher, if you scold my fellow disciples, isn't that the same as scolding me? It doesn't matter if you scold me, but aren't you scolding my Yundong in a roundabout way? He is our leader. If we are scolded, he will also lose face. No, I have to fight for Yundong." Thinking of this, Su Chan threw everything else out of her mind. She stretched out her hand and said loudly, "Mr. Hua, I know." Li Yundong was shocked and pulled her back. "Hey, don't talk nonsense." Seeing Li Yundong's action, Mr. Hua immediately shouted, "Li Yundong, if you don't say it yourself, why don't you let other students say it?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to say, "She's my girlfriend, not a student here." However, he saw that the teacher was in a fit of anger. If he were to say something like that, it might cause another storm, so he swallowed the words back down. Mr. Hua pointed at Su Chan and said loudly, "Student, don't be afraid. Stand up and answer the question loudly." Seeing that Li Yundong was no longer stopping her, Su Chan jumped up and said loudly, "This poem was written by Yuan Zhan of the Tang dynasty. It's called Chrysanthemum." Everyone in the classroom looked at Su Chan in unison, and there was a lot of discussion for a while. Mr. Hua was relieved. D***min. Finally someone knows the source of this poem. It's not easy. Mr. Hua's face was full of relief. Seeing that Su Chan had answered without thinking, he wanted to test her again, so he asked, "Do you know why ancient literati loved chrysanthemums?" When Li Yundong heard this, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He opened his mouth wide and thought to himself, "No way, how could there be such a coincidence?" Hearing this, Su Chan thought, Isn't this the question Yundong just asked?" The little girl was overjoyed. Without thinking she said loudly, "Because they all have a strong taste." Chapter 358. Go to watch net. As soon as Su Chan said this, the whole classroom fell silent in an instant. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Go to watch net. Everyone looked at Su-chan with their mouths agape. The teacher standing on the podium was even more dumbfounded, and his temples were beating wildly. Li Yundong was even more frantic in his heart. F***ck, you speak too fast. I can't even stop you. This silence only lasted for a moment, and then there was a burst of amazing laughter in the classroom. The laughter was like thunder on the ground, almost lifting the roof. Su-chan was confused by everyone's laughter. She looked around blankly and said, "Did I say something wrong?" Mr. Hua, who was on the podium, suppressed his anger and said, "Student, if you don't know, then you don't know. Don't make trouble in class." Su-chan said loudly, "I know. It was Yundong who told me." After that, she reached out and pointed at Li Yundong, and all the eyes in the classroom turned to Li Yundong. Li Yundong suddenly burst into tears. He thought to himself, "Girl, I've known you for so long. Why do you always make trouble for me every time you come to school?" Su-chan didn't react at first, but she soon found that something was wrong, especially when she looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong's expression was as if he wanted to find a hole to hide in. Su-chan's heart skipped a beat. She thought to herself, "Oh no, did I say something wrong again? But I said it according to what Yundong told me." The little girl felt wronged and puzzled. She lowered her head and timidly glanced at Li Yundong. Then, she timidly glanced at the students around her, who were laughing wildly. Her head was getting lower and lower, and in the end, it seemed that she wanted to bury it in her chest. Mr. Hua's veins were bulging on the podium. He said, "Student, please sit down. Student Li Yundong, please stand up." "Oh," Su-chan said and sat down timidly. She glanced at Li Yundong again, only to see that he was looking at her with a tearless expression. He said in a low voice, "Little girl, I'm in trouble because of you." Su-chan lowered her head even more. "Oh," she said, sitting in her seat, muttering in her heart. "What did I do wrong? Why was everyone laughing like that?" As soon as Li Yundong stood up, the students in the classroom cheered loudly. Not only the students in the classroom, but even the corridor outside was full of students. They had all heard the news and wanted to see Li Yundong's elegant demeanor. Fortunately, Li Yundong didn't let them down. He had put on a good show. For a moment, the students inside and outside the classroom were excited. Countless faces were pressed against the glass windows of the classroom, and countless phones were turned on to the camera function, recording every movement in the classroom. In the face of such cheers, Li Yundong felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He smiled dryly and said to Mr. Hua, who was as pale as the bottom of a pot on the podium, "Mr. Hua, actually." Before he could finish, Mr. Hua shouted angrily, "Don't talk. Listen to me." In the face of his teacher's outburst, Li Yundong tactfully shut his mouth. Teacher Hua said loudly, "I know you are a celebrity student in this school, but please respect my profession. Please respect my identity. I'm the teacher. As long as you're teaching in this class, you're my student." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and thought to himself, "How could I not respect you?" Seeing that Li Yundong didn't speak, Mr. Hua said again, "Weren't you very talkative just now? Come on, come to the podium. You give the lecture, and I'll be your student, okay? Come on, especially the problem of heavy taste." After that, he walked down the podium angrily and stood under the podium. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the students inside and outside the classroom roaring with laughter. One by one, they shouted, "Li Yundong, we support you." The noise was like a huge wave, so loud that it almost drowned everyone. Seeing these students jeering like this, Mr. Hua became even angrier. He held the wireless microphone and sneered, "Go, make it clear. You should also experience the feeling of being a teacher. If you don't come up, the whole class will get 0 points in the exam." As soon as this was said, the students suddenly burst into an uproar, especially the students who wanted such credits. They all looked at Li Yundong eagerly, as if they were looking at Guanyin Bodhisattva, who had saved them from suffering. Seeing that he had been forced into a corner, Li Yundong had no choice but to bite the bullet and walk to the podium. He coughed dryly and said, "Actually, this is a misunderstanding." Mr. Hua interrupted him with a sneer and said, "We don't want to hear a misunderstanding. We want to hear a heavy explanation." The students immediately burst into laughter again and clamored, We want to hear a hardcore explanation. Li Yundong was sweating profusely. He felt that he would rather face the siege of all the sects than this scene in front of him. Li Yundong wiped his cold sweat and said quickly, "In fact, there have been many poets who have written about chrysanthemums in China for 5,000 years, but the most famous one is Tao Yuanming. He wrote the famous sentence, picking chrysanthemums under the eastern fence, leisurely seeing the southern mountain." Bai Juyi of the Tang dynasty also wrote the poem, "Only chrysanthemums under the eastern fence can withstand the cold, and the golden millet is clearer at dawn." Huang Chao also left behind the beautiful sentence, "Soaring incense array penetrates Chong'an, and the whole city is covered with golden armor." Li Yundong counted the poets who had written chrysanthemum poems one by one as if they were his family treasures. For a moment, the students quieted down. They didn't know why Li Yundong was criticizing these poets and their poems one by one. They were curious, so they listened to him quietly. Although Mr. Hua was angry, he secretly nodded in his heart. Not bad, he has read a lot of books. No wonder he is so famous in school. It seems that the last time he and Yan Hua debated about Dharma should not be a false rumor. Li Yundong said again, "There are many poems about chrysanthemums, such as Su Shi's Qingji Ruobinggu San Yu, and the golden stamen will flow with rosy clouds. If you want to know the old trillium, it will bloom when all the grass is destroyed." Another example is Li Bai's lamentable chrysanthemum in the eastern fence. The stem is sparse and the leaves are small. Although the words are different, they have their own fragrance. Another example is Du Fu's The cold flowers have bloomed, and the chrysanthemum is alone. The old plucking people frequently change, and the fragrant wine temporarily follows. Li Yundong listed these poets who had written chrysanthemum poems like a machine gun, without stopping at all. The students were all knowledgeable people. For a moment, everyone secretly applauded Li Yundong's strong memory. But at the same time, they became more and more confused. Why did Li Yundong list so many poets and poems that have written chrysanthemum poems? What does this have to do with heavy taste? While they were wondering, Li Yundong said, "Look, among these poets, Tao Yuanming is from Chaisang County in Xuanyang of the Eastern Jin Dynasty, which is now Jiangxi. Bai Juyi is from Hunan, Huang Chao is from Shandong, Su Dongpa is from Sichuan, Li Bai is also from Sichuan, and Du Fu is also from Hunan. Jiangxi cuisine is heavy in color and thick in taste, and people like chili, not to mention Sichuan cuisine, which is famous for its spiciness. Shandong is famous for its Shandong cuisine, which is also characterized by saltiness and freshness, and salt is used to bring out the freshness of dishes. Hunan cuisine is not to mention, fresh and fragrant is its characteristic. Look, I have listed so many people, and the dishes in their places are basically quite heavy, so I say that they all have heavy taste." After Li Yundong finished speaking, he only felt that his head was covered with sweat, as if he had fought with 100 Yuanying stage masters for 500 rounds. When these students heard Li Yundong's nonsense, they immediately laughed, whistled, and cheered one after another. Mr. Hua was originally angry in his heart, but after listening to Li Yundong's nonsense, he couldn't help but smile. He nodded and thought to himself, although this guy is talking nonsense, without a solid foundation in ancient Chinese and an extraordinary reaction, he won't be able to make up for it. Some of the curious girls in the classroom stared at Li Yundong with starry eyes. They couldn't help but say, "Before, I only knew that Li Yundong was strong and brave, but today I know that he is also a romantic and elegant scholar. He is really good at both the pen and the sword. Where can I find a boy like him? What a pity. Idiot, didn't you see him argue with Yan Hua about Buddhism last time? Who can understand that? But didn't you see him recite chrysanthemum poems just now? Wow, he's so stylish. He's so handsome. F***CK. Can't you help getting excited when you hear the word chrysanthemum? Do you also have a heavy taste?" A boy next to them couldn't help sighing when he heard their infatuation. What is amazing? He can win countless fans by bragging for a while and make a group of beautiful girls fall in love with him. They are even willing to marry him. This is amazing. What do you know? You don't know these poems. Show me. Alas, I didn't know until today that even reciting poems can be used to pick up girls. You have to read, children. There are beauties in books. The ancients didn't deceive me. Li Yundong braced himself and gave a random explanation. Although it was barely justifiable, Mr. Hua nodded secretly under the podium, thinking that this matter would be over. However, The students who were watching the fun did not intend to let him go. Some students clamored, "Mr. Li, let's do something exciting." As soon as these students clamored, the students inside and outside the classroom also followed suit. "Let's do something exciting." Li Yundong cursed in his heart. "Damn it, you guys are really taking pleasure in my misfortune. I've solved such a perverted problem, but you still refuse to let me go. Well, if you don't let me have an easy time, I won't let you have an easy time." Li Yundong made up his mind. "In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound," he said loudly. "Do you want something exciting?" The eyes of these birdmen lit up and they nodded excitedly. "Yes, yes, we want something exciting." Li Yundong waved his hand and said, "Well, now put away all the books. Let's take the exam." Everyone was dumbfounded. A student in the front row stammered, "Test, test." Li Yundong glanced at them and said with a matter-of-fact expression, "Don't you want to be excited? Isn't the exam exciting enough?" These students suddenly burst out laughing. Even Mr. Hua, who had been keeping a straight face, couldn't help laughing. A curious student asked, "Mr. Li, what's the content of the exam?" Li Yundong didn't even think about it. He said loudly, "It's about the relationship between scholars singing Chrysanthemum and Heavy Taste." After he finished speaking, he seemed to think of something and added, "You're not allowed to plagiarize and use my explanation just now." There was another burst of laughter outside the classroom. Mr. Hua also laughed and scolded, "Sly." The class could no longer go on. Mr. Hua shook his head helplessly and said, "Forget it, I'll let you go today. Don't make trouble next time." Li Yundong felt as if he had been granted amnesty. He quickly said seriously, "Please rest assured, Mr. Hua. I will live up to the ardent expectations of the party and the people in the future. I will study hard, make progress every day, and strive to be a new person in the construction of the motherland." The crowd burst into laughter again. After the disturbance of the class, Li Yundong waited until the class was over. After he walked out of the classroom, Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling kept whispering, glancing at Li Yundong from time to time, and bursting into laughter from time to time. The little foxes were all arrogant, as if their leader had just done something earth-shattering and earth-shattering. Only Su Chan lowered her head and rubbed the corners of her clothes with her hands. She didn't dare to raise her head to look at Li Yundong. Seeing her like this, Li Yundong wanted to teach her a lesson, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. He decided to wait until they got back. The group of people walked out of the teaching building. Ruan Hongling was talking to Zhou Qin when she suddenly saw an acquaintance out of the corner of her eye. She said to Zhou Qin and Li Yundong, "Wait a minute, I have something to do." As she said this, she ran away and shouted at a boy from afar, "Yanhua, stop right there." Li Yundong glanced over and thought to himself, "Hey, didn't she always hate and dislike this guy? Sorry, I went out for dinner, so the update is late. Tonight's third update is still the same." Chapter 359. Go to watch net. Hearing Ruan Hongling's shout, Yanhua turned around and said with surprise and joy, "Hongling? Where have you been these days? I called you, but you didn't answer. I was so worried about you." Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "Do I have to answer your call? Who are you to me?" Yanhua smiled awkwardly and said, "I'm your friend. It's okay for me to care about you." Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me. Go to watch net." Yanhua looked disappointed. "Then why did you call me? If there's nothing else I'll leave first." Seeing that he was about to turn around and leave, Ruan Hongling quickly shouted, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." Yanhua didn't want to leave. He was just putting on a show. Hearing Ruan Hongling's words, he immediately turned around and smiled apologetically. "What's the matter, Hongling?" Ruan Hongling asked. "That's 6. Where's your family heirloom sword? Is it still at home?" Yanhua saw that she had changed her words halfway. Although he felt strange, he didn't think too much about it. He said, "It's at home. What's wrong?" Ruan Hongling's face lit up with joy. She rolled her eyes and said, "Can I borrow it?" Yanhua didn't even think about it and immediately said, "Yes, of course. I can lend it to anyone but you." Seeing that he agreed so readily, Ruan Hongling was delighted and said with a smile, "Really? That's great. Can I bring it tomorrow? Yanhua nodded and said, tomorrow? Sure. But he seemed to think of something and asked, what do you want this sword for? Ruan Hongling said, it's none of your business. I need it for something. Yanhua suddenly looked confused. He couldn't help glancing at Li Jiandong in the distance and said with jealousy, you don't want to lend it to that guy, do you? Ruan Hongling suddenly said angrily, hey, what did you say? If you don't want to lend it to me, forget it. After that, she stomped her feet and turned to leave. Yanhua quickly pulled her back and said with an embarrassed smile, I'm just asking. I can lend it to you, but you have to promise me that you won't let that guy use it. Ruan Hongling frowned and said angrily, Yanhua, do you know why I've never liked you? Because you are as narrow-minded as a woman. If I'm borrowing it, I'm borrowing it. If I'm not borrowing it, I'm not borrowing it. Since I'm borrowing it, I don't care what I'm going to do with it. What was a man dilly-dallying for? He was even pulling and tugging outside. Wasn't it embarrassing? Let go. Yanhua smiled awkwardly and put down his hand. He said in a low voice, I'm only like this in front of you. Don't worry, I won't ask. I'll lend you the sword tomorrow. Ruan Hongling snorted angrily. You really want to borrow it? Hey, if you're unwilling, then don't lend it to me. I won't blame you. Even if you lend it to me, don't expect me to appreciate it. Yanhua smiled apologetically and said, No, we are friends. It doesn't matter if I lend it to you. Ruan Hongling snorted and said, That's more like it. I'm leaving. Yanhua saw that she had turned around and was about to leave without any hesitation. He called out, Hey. But Ruan Hongling had already walked far away. Only a ponytail swayed behind her head, making Yanhua's mind go into a mess. That's strange. What does she want this sword for? Yanhua muttered in confusion. Yanhua's mind was full of confusion. When he got home after school, he opened the door, put down his school bag, and went out. He turned a corner and went straight to his Aunt Yan Feng's study. His family was quite well off and lived in a courtyard house. His aunt had left for 9 years, but his family still kept her room the same and went in to clean it from time to time. Yanhua pushed open Yan Feng's door and walked into the study. He was shocked. He saw a figure standing next to the sword rack in the study, quietly looking at the long sword on the rack. She was serious and focused, as if she was looking at a long-lost relative. This person was about 1.7 meters tall and had a graceful figure. She was a graceful woman with a charming figure. This woman had a black shawl, and there was an indescribable sense of tranquility all over her body. Yanhua looked at the side of this person's face and saw that she was beautiful. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth, as if she was recalling something. Yanhua glanced at this person's face and immediately said in surprise, Aunt. Yan Feng seemed to have known that he had come in. Her eyes were still focused on the sword quietly placed on the rack. She said without looking back, Hua, long time no see. Do you still remember me? The last time Yanhua saw his aunt, he was still a teenager. At that time, his impression of Yan Feng was that his aunt was very beautiful, but a little difficult to get close to. Looking at her now, her appearance hadn't changed at all in more than 10 years. She was still as beautiful as before, like a young girl. Yanhua said in surprise, Aunt, when did you come back? I haven't seen you for so long, but you're still so beautiful. Yan Feng suddenly smiled, and her smile was full of sarcasm and self-deprecation. Beautiful? What's the use of being beautiful? I can't compete with that fox, can't I? Yan Feng sighed and said faintly, Hua, you have to remember my words. At this time, Yanhua only felt that his mind was a little confused. He didn't know why Ruan Hongling wanted to borrow this sword from him, nor did he know why his aunt, who had suddenly disappeared for 9 years, had suddenly come back. Why did she suddenly say these things to him? Yanhua replied in a daze. What words? Yan Feng gently took the Liuha, one of the twin swords, off the sword rack. She gently stroked the sharkskin sheath on the scabbard with her fingers and said softly, If you like someone, you can't let others take your sweetheart away. Sometimes you don't hesitate to get rid of your competitors. You must strike first to gain the upper hand. Yanhua was shocked. He hadn't expected that Yan Feng would urge him to kill someone. He thought to himself, although I have a grudge against Li Jiandong, there's no need to kill him, right? However, Yan Feng seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. She snorted and slowly pulled out the long sword. In an instant, the sword was unsheathed, and the sword chi radiated in all directions. She said, "You may think that I'm exaggerating, but in the future, you will know how right I am." Yan Feng's eyes suddenly became very distant. She said faintly, "I had the same idea as you at the beginning. I always felt that he wouldn't be so heartless and would come back to me. But in the end, he would rather ascend by himself than return to my side. He even gave his sword to that seductive fox." Alas! Yan Hua was confused and thought to himself, ascend? Seductive fox? What the hell is this? Yan Feng snorted and continued to pour her zhenqi into the liuha. She sneered and said, "Last time, that bastard broke my liuha with the boy's yuanyang blood. I thought that the liuha would fall into his hands and it would be difficult for me to find it again. But I didn't expect that the liuha would still be in the same place. Hey, it's really an anomaly. It seems that even God wants this liuha to return to my hands." After Yan Feng injected some zhenqi into it, the liuha suddenly jumped up by itself and floated in the air, buzzing and emitting a clear and loud sword cry. Yan Hua was stunned. He suddenly remembered that at the school's freshman welcoming party last time, Li Jiandong had been holding this long sword. Hadn't there been such an anomaly? At that time, he had been shocked and doubtful. He had thought that it was some kind of acrobatic stunt, but now his aunt was using the long sword again, just like that night. This time, Yan Hua was standing so close that he could see it clearly. He was shocked and bewildered. He stammered, "Auntie, who are you? What's going on?" Yan Feng turned her face for the first time. She looked Yan Hua up and down and smiled slightly. "You want to know? Hey, I've been hiding it from my family for more than 10 years. You're the first to know my identity. However, it's better if you don't know. Your aunt has enemies all over the world now. It won't do you any good if you know." Yan Hua's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He said loudly, "Aunt, are you a sword immortal?" Yan Feng laughed loudly. "Sword immortal? I guess so." Yan Hua was so excited that his face turned red. He said loudly, "Aunt, can you teach me?" Yan Feng smiled and said, "You? Why do you want to learn cultivation?" Yan Hua said loudly, "The reason why Li Jiandong can overshadow me is probably because he is a cultivator. Aunt, I will definitely defeat him with the cultivation skills you teach me." As soon as Yan Feng heard the name Li Jiandong, her face suddenly changed. "Do you have a grudge against him?" Yan Hua gritted his teeth and said, "Yes. He stole my Hongling." Yan Feng raised her head and laughed loudly. "Our Yan family is really promising. Why has everyone been robbed of their love by others?" Yan Hua said loudly, "Aunt, please teach me Kung Fu. I will definitely beat him." Yan Feng laughed for a while. She lowered her head and looked at Yan Hua deeply. She shook her head and said, "No, although Li Jiandong and I have a grudge, his aptitude is the best I've seen in my life. In the past 500 years, no one has made such rapid progress. I even suspect that he is the reincarnation of a god. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to cultivate so fast. You are no match for him. Don't ask for trouble." Yan Hua's face suddenly turned red and he gritted his teeth. He said angrily, "Why am I no match for him? How do you know that I'm no match for him without even teaching me? How am I inferior to him?" Yan Feng looked at her nephew sympathetically. She shook her head and waved at the liuha in the air. She said, "Don't think about it. With my 10 years of cultivation in the Xianmen sect, I only have a 50-50 chance of winning against him. You have been competitive and eager for quick success since you were a child. This kind of character is not suitable for cultivation at all. You can't beat him. Today, just pretend that you didn't see me." After that, the liuha returned to its sheath with a clang and then jumped back into her hand. Yan Feng's figure flashed and she left the house in the blink of an eye. Yan Hua chased after her and saw that it was empty. Although it was broad daylight, he couldn't see Yan Feng at all. Yan Hua clenched his fists and was as angry as a wild beast. He roared loudly, "How am I inferior to him? Hongling, aunt, I want to prove to you that I am definitely stronger than him. Group 1 to 8 is full. Please add group 9 13,127.0766. Chapter 360. Go to watch net. After school, Li Yundong's face was frighteningly dark along the way. Zhou Qin and Ruan Hongling couldn't help covering their mouths and snickering when they thought of what had happened in the classroom. Su Chan was like a child who had done something wrong. She lowered her head, rubbed the corners of her clothes, and rubbed her toes against the ground, not saying a word. Although the little foxes also kept their mouths shut, their intelligent eyes glanced at Li Yundong and then at Su Chan, as if they were eager to see the world in chaos and were gloating. Go to watch net. When he finally entered the house, Li Yundong's face was as cold as a coffin. He shouted, Zhou Qin, Hongling, do you have anything to do? Well, he was asking them to leave. Zhou Qin was clever and quickly said, I'm going to read. As she said this, she covered her mouth and ran into her room with a snicker. Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes and said with a smile, I'm going to find Sister Zi Yuan. As soon as the two of them left, only the foxes of the younger generation of the Fox Zen school were left standing in the living room, staring at each other. Li Yundong opened his mouth and wanted to teach these little foxes a lesson, but he didn't know what to say. Li Yundong suddenly felt a little depressed. In his opinion, if any of these stinky girls could speak, Su Chan wouldn't have jumped up. But they didn't speak because he didn't want them to. Seeing Li Yundong's long face, the little foxes looked at each other and walked up to Li Yundong together. They said aggrievedly, Leader, please punish us. Although, we don't know what we did wrong, but it's our fault for making the sect leader unhappy. Li Yundong was even more depressed. Oh, it turns out that you've taken advantage of me and still want to force me to abdicate. Li Yundong was so angry that he waved his hand and said impatiently, Go back to your rooms. The little foxes had been waiting uneasily for Li Yundong to teach them a lesson, but they didn't expect that Li Yundong would raise the board high and drop it gently. They were immediately overjoyed and cheered. Long live the leader! Long live the leader! Li Yundong scolded. Hurry up and go back. Don't you think you've caused enough trouble? The little foxes were startled. They immediately covered their heads and fled like frightened birds and beasts. Su Chan, who was among them, rolled her eyes and turned to follow them. She turned around and took a step, her ears suddenly pricking up like a little fox who was extremely vigilant. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong didn't respond after she took a step, so she was delighted and took another step. There was still no response. Su Chan was overjoyed. Just as she was about to run away, she heard Li Yundong say, Sub Chan. The smile on Su Chan's face suddenly collapsed. She turned around, looking like a thief who had been caught red-handed. She moved resentfully to Li Yundong, lowered her head, and mumbled, What are you doing? I also have things to do. Seeing her like this, Li Yundong was so angry that he almost laughed. He said with a straight face, So? What are you going to do? Su Chan's eyes darted around. I want to practice. Li Yundong laughed and asked, Why are you practicing at this time? When Zi Yuan comes back, we'll have dinner. Su Chan was quick-witted and quickly said, I'm going to do housework. Li Yundong snorted and said, Forget it. Do you want to tear this house down? Su Chan was unwilling to give up and said again, Sister Zi Yuan will be back soon. I'll go cook. Li Yundong laughed and said, You cook? What dishes can you cook? Don't tell me that you've forgotten the pain and how you messed up the kitchen last time. Su Chan pouted and said unhappily, I can cook 4 dishes now. Li Yundong opened his mouth wide and looked surprised. Oh, when did you learn to cook? Su Chan snorted and said proudly, I learned it secretly from Xueqi. This is called knowing shame makes one brave. Li Yundong laughed and said, Oh, this is rare. Xueqi can also cook? Su Chan looked as if she had caught Li Yundong by the tail. You underestimate Sherbua. I'll tell her. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and said, How dare she snitch on me? B*****. I'm her leader. Is there anyone who snitches on their superiors to their subordinates? Su Chan snorted and said arrogantly, Anyway, with your girl's cleverness and wit, I believe that it won't be long before a world-class chef appears in this world. Li Yundong laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Ha ha ha, I'm dying of laughter. My stomach is breaking. You're really blowing your own trumpet. How shameless. Su Chan stamped her feet and said angrily, You're so annoying. I really know how to cook. If you don't believe me, I'll cook for you. Li Yundong didn't even think about it and flatly denied, no. For the sake of the safety of the people of the world, you can't enter the kitchen. Su Chan threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and said coquettishly, no, let me cook. I really know how to cook. Li Yundong still refused to let go. No, learn from the mistakes of the past. Do you want to move now that you've just found a house? Seeing that she couldn't persuade him for a long time, Su Chan couldn't help but say with tears in her eyes, you don't like me anymore. You despise me. You don't believe me anymore. Li Yundong suddenly felt a headache coming on and his heart softened. He thought for a moment and resolutely gritted his teeth and said, okay, go ahead. At worst, I'll just move to another house. At first, Su Chan laughed through her tears, but when she heard Li Yundong's last sentence, she immediately said angrily, you're so annoying. I really know how to cook. Li Yundong said with a strange expression, it's really strange. When did you learn how to cook? Why haven't I seen you learn from Xueqi? Su Chan said with a smile. I secretly asked her to learn a few nights ago. Li Yundong smiled and said, then show me your skills. I promise I'll surprise you. Su Chan looked proud, as if she had already cooked a table of Manchu Han imperial feast. She rolled up her sleeves and went into the kitchen. She turned around and saw Li Yundong following her like a shadow. Su Chan immediately said, why are you following me? Li Yundong shook his head and said, I'm worried about you, so I followed you to have a look. Su Chan stamped her feet and said, you're so annoying. I can't do it with you around. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. You said the same thing last time, but in the end, you blew up the kitchen. Su Chan was ashamed and annoyed. That was a long time ago. It won't happen this time. I already know how to use this stove. Li Yundong smiled and said, this is called a gas stove, idiot. You use one for me to see. I'll be relieved when I see that you know how to use it. Su Chan turned on the gas stove with a snap, turned it up and down, and finally turned it off. She said angrily, are you relieved now? I said I know how to use it. Li Yundong thought for a moment and still said worriedly, hey, do you know where the oil, salt, sauce and vinegar are? Su Chan said, oh, I know. Don't worry. I'm not a child anymore. As she said this, she pushed Li Yundong out. Li Yundong was surprised and laughed at the same time. Hey, last time you pushed me out like this and blew up the kitchen. Su Chan stamped her feet and said, if I blow up the kitchen again, I won't live. Li Yundong was shocked. He covered her mouth and pretended to be angry. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm still waiting for you to catch up with me in cultivation, little girl, so that I can fly with you. It doesn't matter if it blows up, as long as you're fine. Su Chan's cheeks turned red. Her heart was filled with sweetness, and a sweet smile seemed to seep out of her heart. She smiled and said, don't worry. Just wait for the delicious food. As she said this, she turned and went into the kitchen, not forgetting to close the door. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and shook his head. But after a while, he opened the door a crack and sneaked his head into the kitchen. Unexpectedly, Su Chan seemed to know what he was doing. She looked at him and said angrily, you're just worried about me. Li Yundong smiled apologetically. Not at all. I just want to ask Chef Su, which 4 dishes are you cooking? Tell me so that I can also learn. Su Chan walked to the door, slammed it shut, and said angrily, I won't tell you. Li Yundong shook his head secretly. He returned to the living room helplessly, wondering what kind of dishes this girl would cook. But after a while, Li Yundong suddenly slapped his thigh and said, I actually let this girl get away with it. I forgot to blame her. Li Yundong thought about it again. It seemed that what had happened at school couldn't be blamed on her. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. At this time, Zi Yuan happened to come back. Li Yundong looked at her and saw that although this fairy-like sister had been busy all day, her clothes were still neat and tidy, and there was no trace of dust on her. Li Yundong secretly admired her in his heart. He said with a smile, a fairy is indeed a fairy. You are still so elegant after a busy day. I admire you. If it were me, I would have been so tired that I would have stuck out my tongue. Zi Yuan smiled slightly. She looked into the living room and asked curiously, where are the others? Usually at this time, your place is very lively. Li Yundong sighed and said, "Alas, I drove them back to their rooms. Today, these little fellows tormented me until I was exhausted. I was almost pissed to death." Li Yundong looked at her and asked, "Where are Xueqi and the others? Didn't they go out with you?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "They arrived later. They said that they were going to buy something in the middle of the night, so they went together. I came back alone." Li Yundong didn't think too much about it and asked, "How is the decoration of the shop going?" Zi Yuan said, "I have already designed 2 sets of plans. You can have a look at them when the time comes. We can discuss them together." Li Yundong smiled and said, "No, you can make your own decisions. I trust your judgment. It must be at the level of a mortal. If I, a rough person, stir up trouble, maybe the immortal products will be turned into inferior ones. Then I will be guilty." Zi Yuan smiled slightly and didn't force him. She thought for a moment and seemed to have something important to tell Li Yundong. She said, "Li Yundong, there is one thing I am thinking about whether to tell you or not." It was rare for Li Yundong to see Zi Yuan so solemn. He asked curiously, "What is it?" Zi Yuan opened her mouth and was about to speak when she saw Xueqi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong, the 3 seniors of the Fox Zen School, coming back together with big and small bags. When Zi Yuan saw this, her red lips gently closed and she swallowed her words. Li Yundong saw that their hands were not empty at all, so he smiled and said, "Where did you buy so many things?" Xueqi said with a smile, "It's a nearby city. I've never been there before, but this time I know how big it is. It's really an eye-opener." Li Yundong said with a smile, "You all appear in the city together. I'm afraid that the employees and guests in the city will be the ones who will open their eyes." The 3 Sherbas laughed at the same time. Xueqi covered her mouth and said, "Leader is actually making fun of us." Li Yundong smiled and said, "By the way, Xueqi Sherbua, I heard that you taught Suchan how to cook." Xueqi was stunned, but she soon smiled and said, "Yes." Hearing this, Li Yundong smiled and said, "When did this happen? Why didn't I know about it?" As soon as he finished speaking, the kitchen door suddenly opened. Suchan came out with 4 plates in her hands like she was performing acrobatics. Then, she placed them in front of Li Yundong one by one and said, "Look, these are the 4 famous dishes of our Fox Zen School." When did the Fox Zen School have 4 famous dishes? Xueqi and the others looked at each other and curiously went forward to have a look. Zi Yuan and the others turned their heads curiously. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on the 4 plates on the table. The first was egg fried rice, the second was a plate of egg fried rice, the third was a plate of rice, and the fourth was a plate of eggs. Li Yundong said with a strange expression, What are these 4 dishes?" Su Chan proudly pointed at the plates and introduced them one by one. "This is egg fried rice, this is rice fried eggs, this is rice fried rice, and this is egg fried eggs. From today onwards, these will be the 4 famous dishes of our Fox Zen School." As soon as she finished speaking, Xueqi and the others burst out laughing. Li Yundong took a deep breath and looked defeated. He pressed his throbbing temples and squeezed out a smile. Well, the 4 famous dishes really look, smell, and taste good." Seeing this, Zi Yuan couldn't help but smile. She glanced around and saw that Ruan Hongling was standing not far away and winking at her. Zi Yuan calmly said to Li Yundong, "I have something to do first." Li Yundong was still thinking about the 4 plates of rice that looked, smelled, and looked good, so he didn't pay attention. After Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling went to their room, Ruan Hongling mysteriously closed the door and said softly, "Sister Zi Yuan, I've thought of a good way to find second sherbua." Chapter 361. Go to watch net. As soon as Zi Yuan heard Ruan Hongling's words, her expression suddenly became serious and she asked, "What can you do?" Ruan Hongling said proudly, "I met Yan Hua today and asked him to borrow the Lioha. Let's go." 7K. OM. Zi Yuan was stunned. "Why did you ask him to borrow the Lioha?" Ruan Hongling said with a smile, "The Lioha was second Sherbua's personal sword in the past, and it is also one of the 2 swords of the Bahuang and Lioha. Now that second Sherbua has caught Ao Wushuang, it is very likely that she has already obtained the Bahuang. As long as she gets the Lioha back, the 2 swords can be combined. Once the Bahuang and Lioha are combined, Second Sherbwa doesn't need to hide at all. She will definitely show up and directly attack the Fox Zen school. Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She said doubtfully, I roughly understand what you mean, but didn't Second Sherbwa go to get the Liuha as soon as she escaped? Ruan Hongling chuckled. I also thought that Second Sherbwa might have taken the Liuha away. But when I met Yan Hua today and asked him, guess what happened? Zi Yuan smiled slightly. It must still be there. Ruan Hongling clapped her hands. Yes, the Liuha is still there. It's unbelievable. We were so busy with all kinds of things that we didn't think of looking for the Liuha as soon as possible. But Second Sherbwa didn't take it either. Sister Zi Yuan, don't you think it's strange? There was a thoughtful look on Zi Yuan's face. She said it's indeed strange. Logically speaking, Second Sherbwa should have gone to get the Liuha as soon as possible. With her cultivation, once she gets the Liuha, it will be like adding wings to a tiger. But why hasn't she taken so long to get it? Speaking of this, Zi Yuan suddenly said, don't delay it anymore. Go to Yan Hua's house and get it now. No matter what, you have to get the Liuha first. Ruan Hongling responded, turned around, and went out the door. Zi Yuan sat alone by the bed, frowning slightly, and lowered her head in thought. About half an hour later, Ruan Hongling rushed back angrily. Before she entered the door she shouted, Sister Zi Yuan, it's terrible. Zi Yuan suddenly stood up and asked in a deep voice, what's wrong? Judging from your appearance, could it be that the Liuha is missing? Ruan Hongling's face was a little pale. She said, Yan Hua, he said that his aunt, Second Sherbwa, took away the Liuha. Zi Yuan frowned. When did this happen? Ruan Hongling said bitterly, I should have been there half an hour earlier for what happened just now. Zi Yuan shook her head and said, if you had gone half an hour earlier, I wouldn't have seen you. In Second Sherbwa's current state, she would never show mercy to anyone who tried to stop her from taking revenge on the Fox Zen school. At that time, not to mention that you're her martial nephew, even if you were her own flesh and blood, I'm afraid she would still kill you. Ruan Hongling let out a long sigh and said, although I don't like Second Sherbwa, I really feel bad seeing her like this. What's the difference between her and falling into the devil's way? Our Linggong sect is already short of manpower. Now Second Sherbwa is determined to go against the Fox Zen school. And you are also determined to help the Fox Zen school. Oh my God, why do you have to make our Linggong sect suffer so much? Could it be that God also wants to destroy our Linggong sect? Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, the clouds rise and fall, and the tide rises and falls. That's all. Hongling, everything in this world is just a fleeting cloud. Don't pay too much attention to it. Ruan Hongling was angry when she heard this. She said angrily, you are always like this. When it comes to your own affairs and the affairs of the Linggong sect, you don't care about anything. When it comes to Li Yundong, you are so nervous that you feel like you have lost your life. You still say that you don't like him. Zi Yuan's cheeks turned red at first, but she soon calmed down. She glanced at Ruan Hongling faintly and said, it's just cultivation in the mortal world. I'm worried about my cultivation, not Li Yundong. Ruan Hongling moved closer to Zi Yuan and widened her eyes, as if she wanted to find some clues on her face. She said word by word, you are deceiving yourself. Zi Yuan shouted angrily, you have no respect for your elders. Seeing that Zi Yuan was angry, Ruan Hongling secretly stuck out her tongue and changed the topic. By the way, Sister Zi Yuan, why do you think Second Sherbwa waited until today to get the Liuha sword? Why didn't she go earlier? Zi Yuan's face suddenly became very cold. Ruan Hongling rarely saw Zi Yuan show such an expression, and she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. Zi Yuan said in a deep voice, Second Sherbwa didn't go to the Liuha sword. There are a few possibilities. First, she might have been like us. She was too busy with all kinds of things, so she didn't go to get it. As soon as she finished speaking, Ruan Hongling said, now that I think about it, I don't think it's possible, because for her, there is only one thing she wants to do, and that is revenge. But we have a lot of things to do and a lot of things to consider. Moreover, the enemy is in the dark while we are in the light. It's normal for us to not think of it, but it's impossible for Second Sherbwa, who is hiding in the dark, to not think of it. Zi Yuan nodded in agreement. She said, you're right. So, there is a second possibility. This possibility is that second Sherbua has been looking for it before, but she hasn't been able to find it. She didn't find it until today. Ruan Hongling shook her head and said, Yanhua also said that second Sherbua said this, but I don't quite believe it, because second Sherbua can hide in the Fox Zen school for 9 years without being discovered. How meticulous and careful does she need to be to do this? I don't believe that she would go to Yanhua's house to get the sword in the end. Zi Yuan looked at Ruan Hongling with appreciation. You're right. Originally, if second martial uncle didn't say this, I wouldn't be sure of this final possibility. But now that she said this, I can almost conclude that this sentence is a smokescreen, and the purpose is to confuse and guide us. Ruan Hongling was also an extremely intelligent person. Her eyes lit up and she said, Ah? Sister Zi Yuan, what do you mean? Zi Yuan said in a cold voice, Second Sherbua is very likely to have been with us all the time. Last time Li Yundong and I went back to the place where we had buried the body of the golden snake, it had already been dug up. At that time, we suspected that someone was following us, and their cultivation was higher than ours. Now, it seems that this person is most likely second Sherbua. The reason why she hasn't gone to get the Lioha is probably because she has been following us and can't get away. Ruan Hongling frowned and said, That's not right. Even if she is following us, she shouldn't be unable to get away 24 hours a day, right? Zi Yuan suddenly laughed and said gloomily, What if she is among us? Hearing this, even though Ruan Hongling was usually fearless, she couldn't help but shiver at this time. Ruan Hongling opened her mouth wide and wanted to say something, but when the words came to her mouth, she couldn't say them. It was as if Yan Feng, who had been hiding for 9 years, was standing in a dark corner and staring at her viciously, making her hair stand on end. Ruan Hongling subconsciously looked around and said with a chill all over her body, Sister Zi Yuan, don't joke around. Don't scare me. Zi Yuan said coldly, Didn't you notice? The last time second Sherbua appeared, it happened that everyone in the Fox Zen school had gone to buy clothes. They were all in the fitting room, which gave second Sherbua a chance to get her young spirit out of her body. Coincidentally, this time, when second Sherbua appeared, the 3 Sherbas of the Fox Zen school happened to go to the market together. Hey, I hope this is a coincidence. Ruan Hongling's scalp went numb when she heard this. She said, Sister Zi Yuan, second Sherbua can't be so bold. She actually sneaked back to the Fox Zen school? This is too terrifying, isn't it? Zi Yuan laughed and said, The more impossible it is, the less willing people are to doubt and believe it. Second Sherbua took advantage of this to make us think that she had escaped far away. But in fact, she sneaked back. This is called the darkest place under the lamp. Ruan Hongling felt a chill in her heart. She said, Then who could it be? Zi Yuan pondered for a while and said, The 3 Sherbas of the Fox Zen school are the most suspicious. It should be one of them. Ruan Hongling jumped up and was about to rush out of the door. She said, No, I have to tell Li Yundong immediately. Although this guy is a bit of a bastard, he is still a good person. If second Sherbua suddenly attacks him, it is very likely that his body and soul will be destroyed. Zi Yuan grabbed her and shouted in a low voice, Stop, don't go. Ruan Hongling turned around and widened her eyes. Why? Sister Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan said in a deep voice, Li Yundong has a pure heart and is easygoing. He is not a shrewd person. Once he knows that second Sherbua is hiding around the Fox Zen school, he will definitely reveal it in his usual words and expressions. With second Sherbua's sensitivity, she will definitely notice it immediately and escape without hesitation. At that time, it will be really difficult for us to find her again. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, But aren't you afraid that something will happen to Li Yundong? Aren't you the most worried about him? Zi Yuan looked at her strangely. It seems that you are the one who is more anxious now, aren't you? Ruan Hongling stamped her feet and said, I'm really not worried, but the eunuch is. Good intentions are treated as ill intentions. Zi Yuan smiled slightly, and there was a hint of appreciation in her eyes. She said, Don't worry. I used words to provoke Li Yundong before. As a result, the next day, I saw black qi in his left nose and red qi in his right nose. This is clearly the appearance of the highest realm of the 8 turns of fire creation. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but be shocked. That's impossible. He can cultivate to the highest realm of the 8 turns of fire creation in one night? Then he is only 1 step away from the 9 turns? Zi Yuan also sighed and said, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. How could a person's cultivation be so fast? Guan Hongling shook her head and said, it's too scary. Last time on the rooftop, I saw him dance the fan of 7 treasures freely in one night, as if he had practiced it for several lifetimes. Zi Yuan said, so, you don't have to worry about Li Yundong. He is now in the pure Yuanying phase. In terms of cultivation and kung fu, he is only above second Shibua, not below her. If it's a fair fight, maybe he doesn't know as much as second Shibua, and he's not as skilled as her, but if second Shibua wants to sneak attack him, then it's another matter. With Li Yundong's current realm, if anyone with a lower cultivation than him wants to sneak up on him, his divine mind can predict the future. Since I can see through Li Yundong's cultivation, I believe second Shibua can also see through it, so she won't take the risk to sneak up on Li Yundong. Moreover, since she took such a big risk to sneak back, she must have some amazing plot. Now that we have found her, the enemy is in the light and we are in the dark. The situation is in our favor. If she finds out, it won't be good. Guan Hongling thought for a moment and said, what if second Shibua attacks the other people of the Fox Zen school? Zi Yuan smiled and said, that won't happen. Before second Shibua achieves her goal, she definitely won't act rashly and alert the enemy. With her personality, she won't show her dagger if she doesn't have the confidence to win. As she spoke, Zi Yuan's voice suddenly became cold. I really don't know what second Shibua is up to. Guan Hongling suddenly understood, but she quickly frowned and said, if second Shibua takes the Liuha, it's impossible for her to keep it with her. Where would she hide it? Moreover, why doesn't she combine the Liuha and Bahuang? With the Bahuang and Liuha in hand, who in the world will she be afraid of? Zi Yuan smiled and said, I also thought of this before, but you have to know that Ao Wushuang was sealed in the Emperor's clock by second Shibua. Do you know what kind of powerful magical weapon it is? Guan Hongling nodded and said, of course I know. This is a powerful magical weapon of Yi fashion of the Tang dynasty. It can seal any master below the immortal level, including Jinshin and Thunder Retribution masters. Zi Yuan nodded and said, yes, the Emperor's clock is very domineering, but it also has one of its biggest shortcomings, that is, once it is sealed, it is difficult to release it again. Therefore, although Ao Wushuang was sealed by second Shibua, in fact, Ao Wushuang has become the safest person in the world, because second Shibua can't break the Emperor's clock to release Ao Wushuang, and she can't get the Bahuang sword beside Ao Wushuang. Guan Hongling sighed and said, this is called being too clever and making a fool of yourself. So what should we do now? Now the Zhangyi school is aggressive, and second Shibua is lurking around us. We have just started our business, and our livelihood is a problem. There are so many problems. What should we do? Zi Yuan said lightly, if he is strong, let him be strong. If he is tyrannical, let him be tyrannical. If he is tyrannical, let him be tyrannical. We just need to wait and see who will show their foxtail in the end. In the end, Zi Yuan suddenly sighed and said, I hope our guess is wrong. Otherwise, the grudge between second Shibua and the Fox Zen school will really be impossible to resolve. When Zi Yuan mentioned the grudge between Yan Feng and the Fox Zen school, Guan Hongling suddenly sighed and said faintly, Sister Zi Yuan, when the time comes, if second Shibua really wants to fight to the death with Li Yundong, which side will you help? Chapter 362. Go to Watch Network. Zi Yuan was stumped by this question. Although she had long expected that she might face this day in the future, she had been subconsciously avoiding this question, because even she did not know how to face it. Watch Net. On one side was the second Shibua of her sect. Although Hongling had not received much care from second Shibua, she had received a lot of guidance from second Shibua in cultivation when she was a child. It could be said that she owed him a debt of gratitude. Moreover, even if second Shibua had not given her any guidance, he was still her Shibua in terms of seniority. In terms of distance, he was much closer to her than Li Yundong, an outsider. However, although the other side was a person who had nothing to do with her in theory, her master's psalm had connected her fate with him. After getting along with him for so many days, even if there was no true love, there was still a trace of affection. If she watched him fight with second Shibua, or if he died at the hands of second Shibua one day, what should she do? For a moment, Zi Yuan couldn't help but be a little dazed. Guan Hongling saw that Zi Yuan was in a daze, and her eyebrows were full of worry, as if thousands of worries were entangled together, turning into a mess that could not be untied. Ruan Hongling let out a long sigh and said, "Alas, on one side is my second Xueqi, and on the other side is my lover. What should I do?" Zi Yuan was a little confused and couldn't help murmuring, "Yes, what should I do?" Ruan Hongling laughed and clapped her hands. "Sister Zi Yuan, you finally admitted that you fell in love with this guy." Only then did Zi Yuan wake up as if from a dream. She blushed and glared at Ruan Hongling with shame and anger. "What did you say?" Ruan Hongling giggled and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, don't deny it. Your subconscious has already answered for you just now. You can't deny it." Zi Yuan said angrily, "Hongling, you're getting more and more outrageous. If you keep talking, I'll drive you back to the mountain." Ruan Hongling was startled. She quickly pulled Zi Yuan's arm and said coquettishly, "Sister Zi Yuan, now that our sect has been sealed, you want me to go back? Do you have the heart to let me be bullied alone?" Zi Yuan rolled her eyes at Ruan Hongling. "If you don't want to be bullied, behave yourself." After she finished speaking, she also sighed and said, "Now the Zhengyi sect is very powerful. They are pressing forward step by step in the light, and second Xueqi is like a ghost, making arrangements everywhere in the dark. I feel that we are trapped both internally and externally, making it hard for us to eat and sleep in peace. I'm not worried about what the Zhengyi school and second Xueqi will do to us, but Li Jiandong. Maybe it's time to teach him some powerful magic." Ruan Hongling was slightly surprised. "Sister Zi Yuan, what are you going to teach him?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, "Back then, I asked him what kind of magic he wanted to learn among the 5 elements of the Great Way. He answered me that thunder magic was the strongest in the world. If he wanted to learn it, he would learn the strongest thunder magic. Back then, I didn't dare to teach him when I saw that his cultivation wasn't high enough. But now that his cultivation is high enough, it's time to teach him." Ruan Hongling let out a cry of dissatisfaction and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, I begged you many times, but you refused to teach me. Now you are actually taking the initiative to teach this guy. You are so biased." Zi Yuan glared at Ruan Hongling and said, "Your cultivation is not high enough. You can't cultivate yang qi from yin qi. How can you practice thunder magic? First, practice the ordinary 5 elements Taoism. Nuclear weapons can kill people, and so can bullets. Cultivators should not be too ambitious." "Oh, I know." Ruan Hongling pouted and didn't say anything, but she thought to herself, "Sister Zi Yuan, although you don't admit it, and you don't want to admit it in your heart, I still feel that you have fallen in love with Li Yundong. When the day comes when you finally have to admit it, you will find that this guy doesn't love you, but that fox spirit. Let's see what you will do then." While Ruan Hongling and Zi Yuan were talking privately in the room, Li Jiandong was tasting the 4 famous dishes, made by Su Chan Chao Yi, and the others of the Fox Zen school did not join in the fun and returned to their own rooms. Seeing that there was no one around, Su Chan blinked her eyes and looked at Li Jiandong, who was slowly tasting the 4 famous dishes. Li Yundong had a serious look on his face as he chewed slowly and repeatedly. He glanced at Su Chan and saw that the little girl was deliberately pretending to be a reserved lady, sitting upright in front of the table, but her eyes betrayed her heart. The little girl looked at Li Jiandong eagerly, her eyes full of joy and expectation. It was as if she was saying, "Is it delicious? Is it delicious?" Li Jiandong laughed in his heart. He deliberately ate slowly for a long time, nodding as he ate, as if he was tasting the delicious food in the world. The more he ate, the more he enjoyed it and the happier he was. Seeing that Li Jiandong was eating so happily, the little girl couldn't hold back anymore. The corners of her mouth couldn't help curling up, and her eyes curved into crescent moons. She kept winking at Li Jiandong as if to say, "Come and praise me, come and praise me." Li Jiandong shook his head, his face full of admiration. He nodded and said, "Did you really make these?" Su Chan finally couldn't help but smile, revealing a row of snow-white teeth. She nodded like a chick pecking at rice. "Yes, I made them. How is it? Is it delicious?" Li Jiandong was not in a hurry to tell her. He slowly wiped his mouth, just like a slow-motion scene in a movie, as if he was deliberately teasing Su Chan. The little girl's heart was burning with anxiety. She couldn't help but rush over to Li Jiandong, grab his shoulders with both hands, shake him hard, and ask eagerly, "How is it? Tell me quickly." Li Jiandong tried hard to hold back his laughter. His face became more and more serious, and his eyes showed surprise. He sighed softly and said, "I didn't expect it to be made by you." Su Chan beamed with joy. "Is it really that delicious? Is it really that delicious?" Li Jiandong nodded hard. "It's true." Su Chan suddenly jumped up, clapped her hands, and laughed proudly. But before she could finish laughing, she saw Li Jiandong gasping and saying, "It's really. It tastes terrible." The smile on Su Chan's face suddenly collapsed. She flew into a rage out of shame and pounced on Li Jiandong, scratching and biting him. "How dare you lie to me?" Li Yundong burst out laughing. He held Su Chan in his arms, pinched her cheek lovingly, and said with a smile, "You put too much salt in it. We cultivators should eat light food. Do you want to break my cultivation by putting so much salt?" Su Chan burst into laughter and said, "Is it so easy to break the cultivation of a dignified leader?" Li Yundong said to Su Chan with a smirk, "With you here, my cultivation will be broken by you easily, won't it?" Su Chan's cheeks turned slightly red. She giggled and said proudly, "It turns out that the nemesis of the famous Zhenren Li is me. Humph, let's see if you dare to bully me again. Be careful, or I'll break your cultivation." Li Jiandong put his arms around Su Chan's slim waist, pinched the tip of her nose, and said with a low, evil smile, "You little fox spirit, if you want to break my cultivation, I'll break your body first." Su Chan immediately jumped up and ran away with a startled smile. She ran to her door like a little rabbit, then poked her head out and looked at Li Jiandong timidly. Then she giggled and said, "Big bad guy, you just want to do bad things." Li Jiandong laughed and said, "A bad guy who doesn't want to do bad things is not a good bad guy." Su Chan giggled, made a face at Li Jiandong, and then hid in the room. In the evening, everyone in the Fox Zen school began to cultivate. After reading hard for a while, Xueqi also fell asleep. Li Jiandong was still cultivating in his spirit space. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly heard a faint voice calling his name slowly and softly. Li Jiandong's heart skipped a beat. Soon, his young spirit came out of his body and he came to the roof outside the room. He saw that Zi Yuan had also come out of her body. She was dressed in white and was looking at him. Although there was a smile on her face, there was a very complicated look in her eyes. Li Jiandong smiled and said, "Are you calling me?" Zi Yuan nodded slightly. "Yes." Li Jiandong felt strange in his heart. "If you have something to do, you can come to me directly. Why did you call me by using your young spirit?" Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, "Because if I look for you directly, I will definitely alarm others. Today, I will give you the last lesson. This lesson is about the secret method of our Zhengyi school that is not taught to outsiders. As the saying goes, the law cannot be spread to 6 ears. Only when you are in the state of young spirit can you float in the air without consuming too much spiritual energy and zhenqi. No one can hide in the air, so naturally, no one can hear what we say." Li Jiandong's expression turned serious. "Why are you leaving? Why do you say it's the last lesson?" Zi Yuan laughed and said, "You think too much. The reason why I said it's the last lesson is that your cultivation has surpassed mine. The only thing I can teach you is some small Taoist magic. Once you learn these, I will have nothing else to teach you. From now on, you'll be able to defeat me in every aspect. The next time we fight, you'll really have to go easy on me." Hearing this, Li Yundong sighed in his heart. He respectfully cupped his hands and saluted Zi Yuan. "Zhenren Zi Yuan, you taught me the kung fu of cultivation and led me into the world of cultivation. Half of my Shentong kung fu was taught by you. In my heart, I regard you as my teacher and friend. I, Li Jiandong, dare to be disrespectful to everyone in the world, but I don't dare to be disrespectful to you in the slightest, let alone attack you." Zi Yuan was originally beautiful. At this time, standing under the bright moonlight, her hair was even more misty, and her figure was as ethereal as a fairy. When she smiled slightly, it seemed that the surroundings had brightened up. Zi Yuan said softly, "You don't have to be like this. This is your good fortune and also my cultivation. After you learn the Taoist magic, if you can punish evil, promote good and promote righteousness, it will also be a blessing for our cultivation world, and also a blessing for our generation." Li Jiandong respectfully bowed again and said, I will definitely remember your words. But I wonder what kind of Taoist magic you are going to teach me today? Zi Yuan said word by word in an extremely solemn tone. Today, I will teach you the 5 thunders righteous magic. Chapter 363. Go to watch net. When Li Yundong heard that Zi Yuan was going to teach him the 5 thunders execution, he immediately became excited. His desire for cultivation was to defeat the power of heaven and transcend heaven and earth, so as to protect himself, Su Chan, and the people around him from being harmed by these forces. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. And the power of thunder was the power of heaven. Mastering the power of thunder and lightning was equivalent to mastering the strongest power in the world. Li Yundong was overjoyed and said, "Do you know the 5 thunders execution?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "I don't know, but I know how to cultivate." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It seems that you are also a genius with an eidetic memory. Could it be that you have memorized all the ancient books you read before?" Zi Yuan chuckled and said, "I remember all of them, but it's been many years. Now, I can't guarantee that they're right. And when it comes to cultivation, if there's a wrong word in the cultivation method, the result will be very different. Do you know the origin of the Fox Zen school?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm ashamed. As the leader of the Fox Zen school, I don't know the origin of the Fox Zen school. Please enlighten me." Zhenren Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan couldn't help but tease him. "You, an outsider, have become the leader of the Fox Zen school, but you want me, an outsider, to tell you the origin of the Fox Zen school. Don't you think it's ridiculous?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's ridiculous. It's a matter of course. As the saying goes, a negative is a positive." After that, the two of them looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Zi Yuan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "During the reign of Emperor Xianzong of the Tang dynasty, Zen Master Baizhang of Buddhism would give a lecture. Every time after the lecture, an old man would stay. Zen Master Baizhang would ask who the old man was. The old man replied, 'I lived on this mountain 500 years ago.' A scholar asked, 'Do great cultivators still have karma?' I said, 'No karma. As a result, I fell into the body of a wild fox. Today, please tell me.' Zen Master Baizhang said, 'Please say it.' The old man asked again, 'Do great cultivators still have karma?' Zen Master Baizhang said, 'No karma.' From then on, the old man was enlightened. He said, 'I have already left the body of a wild fox. I am at the back of the mountain. Please treat me with the courtesy of a dead monk.' The next day, Zen Master Baizhang ordered his disciples to search all over the mountain. They found the body of a black fox on a large rock behind the mountain. After the abstinence, they cremated it. When Li Yundong heard this, he suddenly understood. Su Chan mentioned some of the origins of the rock fox to me before, but she didn't say anything in detail. When she was in the hospital, she also said something about not falling into karma and not being ignorant of karma. At that time, I thought she was particularly touched, but it turned out that there was a story behind it. Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, there is only one word difference between not falling karma and not concealing karma, but the truth is completely opposite. No karma meant that everyone could do whatever they wanted without fear of the karma of heaven and earth. This was because they believed that they could escape the cycle of karma and reincarnation with their own strength. But not being ignorant of karma is the opposite. It says that no matter how powerful a cultivator is, it is impossible to escape karma. Even Bodhisattva must be in awe of this. The former is a fallacious theory. So the rock fox was punished from a monk to a wild fox for 500 years. The latter is the truth of the world. Once he had an epiphany, he immediately became an immortal from a wild fox. From this it can be seen how huge the difference of one word is." Li Yundong clapped his hands and sighed. "You're right. However, I didn't know until today that the rock fox used to be a monk. No wonder his fan of 7 treasures is engraved with the runes of the Vajra Sutra. This powerful magical weapon is full of the majestic and brilliant Buddhist Vajra power." Zi Yuan said, "That's right." After the rock fox got rid of himself, he sighed with emotion about the 500 years he had spent in the Devil's Barrier. He didn't want the cultivators in the world who had fallen into the Devil's Barrier like him to continue to be trapped, so he created the Fox Zen School. At first, he accepted disciples from all over the world, not just the fox spirits. But gradually, The fox spirits gained absolute control of the Fox Zen school, especially in the hands of the fourth-generation sect master, the mystical Silver Fox. The Fox Zen school has completely become a sect of fox spirits, and the Fox Zen school has since become synonymous with fox spirits. Li Yundong said, I understand what you're saying, but what does it have to do with learning the Five Thunders righteous method? Zi Yuan smiled and said, what I want to say is that the art of cultivation must be practiced according to the classics. Don't easily believe the words of others. Otherwise, once you are framed, you will fall into the devil's barrier and can't get rid of it for hundreds of years. Li Yundong laughed and said, I believe you won't harm me. Why worry so much? Zi Yuan shook her head and said, you believe me, but I don't believe myself. If I say one wrong word, you will be doomed eternally. Today, I will only teach you the basic skills of the Five Thunders righteous method. Tomorrow, you will go back to the Lingong sect with me. I will go to the Sutras Pavilion of Master. I remember that he once collected a unique skill of the Shenshao sect, the Five Thunders Jade Book. You can read it and study it in depth. Li Yundong asked curiously, hasn't the Lingong sect been sealed? How can we go back? Zi Yuan smiled slightly. She looked up at the vast sky and said, God doesn't allow us to cultivate, but aren't we still going against the will of heaven? They can seal the Lingong sect, but they can't seal our legs. Li Yundong laughed and said, well said. Tomorrow, we will go to the Lingong sect at night. However, tonight, please tell me how to cultivate the Five Thunders righteous method first. Zi Yuan taught Li Yundong the Five Thunders cultivation method late at night. She patiently explained the theory and cultivation methods to Li Yundong. It was not until the sky was a little bright that the two of them left. They made an appointment to go to the Lingong sect in Mount Longhu the next night. In the morning, Xueqi and Ruan Hongling still came to ask Li Yundong to go to class. Although these two girls were proud and conceited, their temperaments were somewhat similar and they got along very well, so they soon became good friends. When Li Yundong saw the two of them, he quickly waved his hand and shook his head, saying, No, I won't go. You can ask for a leave of absence for me. If it doesn't work, you can arrange for a temporary suspension or suspension of school. I can't go to school anymore. Don't you think it's not enough trouble? Xueqi looked disappointed. She was a little unwilling and asked again. Then what are you going to do if you don't go to school? Li Yundong smiled and said, Of course I'm going to take a look at the shop. I don't feel at ease if I don't go there for a day. Xueqi thought for a moment and said, Then I'll go with you. I can also help by the way. Ruan Hongling stamped her feet and said angrily, Xueqi, you are so disloyal. You promised to go to class with me, but now you go back on your word and stand me up. Xueqi smiled and said, Of course I'm going with Master. Hongling, I'm sorry. I'll treat you to dinner another day. Ruan Hongling was so angry that she tilted her head and said, Humph, I don't care. As she said this, she angrily said to Li Yundong, I won't ask for a leave of absence for you. If you want to ask for a leave, you can find someone to ask for it yourself. After that, she turned around and left, her ponytail swaying behind her head in a very unique way. Li Yundong looked at her leaving figure and laughed. This guy really has a fiery temper. She'll explode at the slightest provocation. As he said this, he looked up at Xueqi and said, It's good if you come with me today. We can discuss the renovation. By the way, if you have anything you don't understand about cultivation on the way, you can also ask me. I'll also help you answer them. I've been too busy recently and have neglected and alienated you. Please don't take it to heart. When Xueqi heard this, she felt warm in her heart. She smiled slightly, and her smile was as sweet as honey. She whispered, As long as I'm by your side, even if you don't talk to me all the time and ignore me all the time, I don't care. When Li Yundong saw her smile, which was like 100 flowers blooming at the same time, his heart suddenly thumped. He quickly withdrew his gaze and didn't dare to answer her again. Li Yundong coughed dryly and changed the topic. Then let's go out now. By the way, call Zi Yuan. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't reply to her, Xueqi's eyes flickered and she didn't force him. She responded softly, but just as she was about to turn around and leave, she asked again, By the way, do you want to call Su-chan? Li Yundong was about to speak, but suddenly he felt the sound of footsteps approaching gently. His heart skipped a beat, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He deliberately said loudly, "No, this girl only knows how to cause me trouble. If I call her, maybe she will cause me some trouble again." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Su-chan jump out of the door with her hands on her hips. She said unhappily, "Well, as soon as I came, I heard you talking bad about me behind my back. You're so annoying. How did I cause you any trouble? You obviously despise me." After that, she covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Seeing that the little girl was crying, Li Yundong hurried forward, but when he took a closer look, he saw that although the little girl was covering her face with her hands, a pair of eyes peeking out from between her fingers were rolling around, looking at him slyly. As soon as the little girl's crafty and quick-witted eyes saw him, she immediately dodged in panic. Then, she closed her fingers again and clenched them tightly. She cried loudly, but after crying for a while, it was all thunder and no rain. Now Li Yundong understood that the little girl was acting coquettishly in front of him. Li Yundong held back his laughter and put on a look as if he wanted to watch the show. He looked at the little girl with interest, but didn't comfort her. Seeing that Li Yundong wasn't moving, she couldn't help but sneak a peek at him through the gaps between her fingers. This time, she saw that Li Yundong was watching a good show. Su-chan immediately became unhappy. She put down her hand, pouted and stomped her feet. "Why didn't you come and talk me out of it?" she said. "Why didn't you come and persuade me?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Persuade you about what?" Su-chan pouted and said with a resentful face, "You only know how to bully me. You're so annoying." As she said this, she looked at Xueqi, took her hand and said coquettishly, "Sister Xueqi, look, this person is so annoying. Not only did he talk behind my back, but he also deliberately angered me." Xueqi saw that Su-chan was charming and cute. Although she was sometimes jealous of her, she couldn't hate her in her heart. She smiled and said, "Master, he's just playing with you." Su-chan made a face at Li Yundong, then put on a posture of continuing to act coquettishly and threatened, "Will you take me out or not?" Seeing her posture, Li Yundong had no choice but to raise his hands high and say with a smile, "How dare I not? Come on, Empress Dowager. I'll take you out of the palace." Su-chan immediately beamed with joy. She ran over to Li Yundong, put on a show, and then said in a drawling voice, "Let's go." Li Yundong quickly got into the mood. With a wretched and humble look, he carefully held Su-chan's white wrist and then led her out of the room. Because Li Yundong lived on the second floor, the little foxes downstairs had long heard the noise of them making. As soon as they went out, Li Yundong found that the little foxes were craning their heads downstairs and staring at him. Li Yundong suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. He thought to himself, "Oh my God, with so many pairs of eyes looking at me, it's okay if I don't have a strong husband, but I still need the prestige of the leader. If these little foxes also make trouble, how can I live?" Li Yundong immediately had an idea. He nodded and bowed to Su-chan, who was beside him, and said, "Empress Dowager, please close your eyes. I'll take you to a good place." Su-chan didn't doubt him. She closed her eyes and said with a smile, "Little Li, where are you taking me?" When Li Yundong heard this, he was immediately amused. He thought to himself, "Oh, little girl, you're really taking advantage of me." Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, "Empress Dowager, don't worry. I'll take you out of the palace now." As he said this, he turned around and took Su-chan into the bathroom. Then, he quickly turned around and ran out, locking the door behind him. Only then did Su-chan come to her senses. She opened her eyes, rushed to the door and said in surprise, "Why did you lock me in?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Aren't you going to go to the palace? I'm taking you to the palace, aren't I?" Only then did Su-chan realize that she had been tricked by Li Yundong. She stamped her feet and shouted, "You're so annoying. I'm not going to the palace. I'm going out of the palace." At this time, the little foxes downstairs were all laughing so hard that they looked like gourds covering their mouths. Li Yundong stood on the stairs and glared at them. "You're still laughing. Do you also want to go to the palace? Shall I send you all out later?" The little foxes quickly jumped up one by one and ran into their rooms while giggling. Li Yundong turned his head and looked at Xueqi. He saw that the girl, who was usually serious, was laughing so hard that she was bending over. He quickly winked at her and said, Idiot, why are you still standing there? If you don't run now, when will you? Chapter 364. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong ran out with Zhou Qin and happened to meet Zi Yuan coming out from the opposite door. Li Yundong was amused and said with a smile, "Oh, what a coincidence. Are you also going out of the palace?" Zhou Qin was holding back her laughter. When she heard Li Yundong's words, she couldn't help laughing again. Go to the Kanban network. Li Yundong turned his head and glared at Zhou Qin, pretending to be angry. Be serious. We are about to leave the palace. Zhou Qin pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Which palace are you going out of? Is it the Gong or the Gong?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Whichever you want." As soon as they stopped at the door, the girl called for someone to open the door and ran out. She jumped on Li Yundong's back like a gust of wind, hugging him like an octopus, scratching and biting. "You're so annoying. How dare you play with me?" Li Yundong turned his head and laughed at Su Chan. "Oh, are you done with the Gong?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, "You're so annoying. You stink." The three of them laughed and played. Zi Yuan looked at them in confusion and asked in confusion, "You, what are you doing? What do you mean by going out of the palace? Who's going out of the palace?" Su Chan and Zhou Qin pointed at Li Yundong at the same time. He wants to go out." Li Yundong quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, No, I won't go out. If I want to go out, everyone will go out together." Zhou Qin and Su Chan spat at the same time and scolded with a smile, "It stinks." Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. F***ck. I'm going out of the palace with 3 great beauties today. Su Chan bit Li Yundong's ear and giggled. "Who wants to go with you? You're so shameless." Zhou Qin also covered her mouth and laughed. "If you want to go out, you can go by yourself. I don't go out with men." At this time, Zi Yuan understood a little. She looked at Li Yundong helplessly, shook her head, and sighed. "Alas, you're already the leader of a sect. Why do you like to play so much? You're like a child." Li Yundong didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled cheekily and said to Zi Yuan, "Your Majesty, I'm going out of the palace with the 2 concubines. Would you like to come with us?" Seeing his shameless appearance, Zi Yuan couldn't help laughing. "I'm going to the store." "Where are you going?" Li Yundong was overjoyed and said with a smile, "We are also going to the store. I was about to call you. Let's go together." The 3 of them chatted and laughed as they left. In the room, Chao Yi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong stood at the door and looked at their backs. Chao Yi put her palms together and said, "Ever since Leader came to our Fox Zen school, our lives have been full of laughter. I really hope that this kind of life can continue forever. It would be a great blessing for our Fox Zen school." Lu Yuehong also nodded and sighed. "Yes, hearing the laughter of the younger generation, I feel much better. If only Zhang Sunhong was still here." Zhuang Yiting was a little silent. She silently watched Li Yundong and the others leave and said, "Let's go. We also have to speed up our cultivation." Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin came to the pedestrian street and went straight to the shop. Before they reached the shop, they saw several craftsmen holding a design drawing outside the shop, pointing at it and talking about it. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Who are these people?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Oh, they should be the decoration workers I contacted." Li Yundong was even more surprised. "You contacted the decoration workers? Could they be holding a design drawing in their hands?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Of course." Li Yundong was surprised and delighted. What kind of decoration company is so powerful that they actually made the design drawing in a day or 2? This is simply the Ultraman of the decoration industry. Zhou Qin looked at Zi Yuan and said with admiration, "This design was made by Zi Yuan after working overtime. If you want to thank someone, thank her." Li Yundong was shocked and turned to look at Zi Yuan. He sighed in surprise and said, "Is there anything in this world that you can't do?" Zi Yuan said faintly, "It's just a small trick. It's not worth mentioning." Li Yundong smiled and said, "If your words were heard by the interior designers, I'm afraid they would die of depression. Let's go and see Zi Yuan's masterpiece." When the group of people walked to the door of the store, A man in a jacket saw Xueqi at a glance and came up to greet her warmly. "Miss Zhou, we meet again." Xueqi smiled and went up to him. "Mr. Han, are you personally leading the team? Why are you giving me face?" Li Yundong saw that the man called Mr. Han was a middle-aged man in his 40s with a slight beard on his face. His appearance was average, but his eyes were quite bright and sleek. While Li Yundong was looking at him, Mr. Han also glanced at Li Yundong and quickly looked at Li Yundong. Obviously, he had been in the business world for a long time and had developed a pair of sharp eyes. Mr. Han glanced at Li Yundong. Although the man had a peaceful smile on his face, there was an air of arrogance and aloofness in his imposing manner. Mr. Han suddenly felt a chill in his heart and thought to himself, "Which family's son is this? I, Han Yongchong, have seen countless people, but I've never seen such an extraordinary young man." Mr. Han's gaze followed Li Yundong's back and fell on Zi Yuan. With just one glance, his mind buzzed. He felt that there was a fairy standing in front of him. She was so beautiful that he didn't dare to look at her. It was as if looking at her would be blaspheming the most beautiful fairy in the world. Mr. Han's eyes followed Li Yundong's back and fell on Zi Yuan. President Han quickly moved his gaze away and glanced at Su Chan again. As soon as he saw her, he felt his heart beating wildly. His eyes were fixed on Su Chan, and he couldn't move his eyes away anymore. He shouted in his heart, "How could there be such a charming and soul-stirring woman in this world?" Li Yundong saw that he was staring at Su Chan in a daze, as if he had lost his soul. The eyes of the two young men behind him almost fell out of their sockets. They stared at Su Chan as if they wanted to swallow her whole. Li Yundong was a little displeased. He coughed dryly, which shocked Han Yongchong. He came back to his senses and smiled awkwardly at Xueqi and Li Yundong. The first thing he said was an authentic Beijing accent. "Hey, everyone, I'm sorry. I lost my composure. Han Yongchong took the initiative to shake hands with Li Yundong. "I haven't asked for your name yet." Li Yundong smiled and reached out to shake hands with him. "My name is Li Yundong." Han Yongchong's face showed a thunderous expression. He was surprised and said, "Ah, nice to meet you." But in his heart he thought, "Li Yundong? I've never heard of this name. I've never heard of a family with the surname Li in Tiannan City. What's so great about that? Could it be that he's from another province?" Li Yundong's name could be said to be famous in the cultivation world, but in the secular world, it was an ordinary name. Li Yundong was well aware of this. He didn't care about the other party's hypocritical politeness. He just smiled and said, "Mr. Han, you personally led the team to work so early. You're really considerate. On behalf of all the employees of Desanxian, I would like to express my gratitude to you." When Han Yongchong heard this, he asked curiously, "Desanxian, is Child Li going to open a restaurant?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "No, it's the Xian of Immortals." Han Yongchong was sure that Li Yundong was a spoiled brat with a great background. He made up his mind to curry favor with him, so he joked, "Desanxian? What a good name. Look at the three stunning beauties around Child Li. Aren't they the three fairies who descended to the earth?" When Li Yundong heard this, he was suddenly happy. He looked at Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Xueqi and saw that the three of them had different beauties, but they were all stunning beauties. It was a coincidence that the name Desanxian was used on the three of them. Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, I didn't expect that there would be such a saying about Desanxian. Interesting, very interesting." When Su Chan heard someone praise her as beautiful as a fairy, she was so happy that she beamed with joy. She held Li Yundong's arm and raised her head to act coquettishly at him. Zi Yuan smiled faintly and didn't comment. Xueqi smiled slightly, but thought to herself, "Zi Yuan is a real fairy." Although Su Chan is a demon, with Li Yundong's help, she can also become an immortal in the future. But what about me? When can I cultivate to the real immortal realm? Li Yundong saw a hint of sadness in the corner of Xueqi's eyes, which quickly disappeared. He saw it in his eyes and remembered it in his heart, but he didn't say anything. Han Yongchong wanted to flatter Li Yundong, so he smiled at Xueqi and said, "Miss Zhou, this design of yours was designed by Child Li, right? This design is of a very high standard. I've been in the decoration business for more than 10 years, and I've also been in the capital for several years. I've never seen such a simple and elegant design. Xueqi came to her senses and said with a smile, "You guessed wrong." Li Yundong also laughed and said, "Mr. Han, you're flattering me wrong. This design was not made by me. It was made by Zi Yuan." As he spoke, he pulled Zi Yuan to his side. Zi Yuan nodded slightly at Han Yongchang and didn't say anything. Han Yongchang's flattery had failed, but he was not embarrassed. He quickly reacted and said, "Oh, it turned out to be made by Miss Zi Yuan. This design is really wonderful. It's amazing. If you were to design, I'm afraid we would all be starving." His flattery made Li Yundong and the others laugh, and Zi Yuan also smiled slightly. Li Yundong said with a smile, "Don't be in a hurry to flatter us. Let's talk about the price first. No matter how much you flatter us, I won't pay you more. I'm a real poor man." Han Yongchang said with a smile on his face, "Child Li, all of the beauties around you are rare in the world. It's a blessing for an ordinary man to find one of them. But you have 3 of them by your side. What's even rarer is that no matter which one of them is, they are all masters with unique skills. They are not comparable to those vases. If you say that you are a poor man, then I won't do it. Aren't you scolding me in a roundabout way?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "How did I scold you?" Han Yongchang said with a smile, "Think about it. If it were an ordinary person, would any of the fairies around you be able to follow him? What would they want from him? Could it be that they want a wife and children, a warm kong, and a daily necessities? Even if they get the design, they won't be able to keep it. Only someone as extraordinary as you can protect these 3 fairies and the shop of the Desanxian. In my opinion, just by looking at the 3 people around you, I can see that you are either rich or noble. You must be a great person." As he said this, he rolled up his sleeves and gave a thumbs up. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Your flattery makes me feel a little smug. Be careful not to flatter me too much. If I fall to my death, you won't get any money." There were many hidden meanings in Li Yundong's words. One of them was that he had acquiesced to the decoration cooperation with Han Yongchang. Han Yongchang was delighted and said, "That's impossible. With your physiognomy, not only will you live to 100 years old, but you will also have a brilliant career. In ancient times, you must be a talented general and minister. In modern times, you must be a business magnate." Li Yundong said with a smile, "Come on, don't flatter me. I still say the same thing. I'm actually a poor man. I really don't have much money. Anyway, I'll give you a price. If you think you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, I won't force you. It's useless for you to praise me. I can't make money. If I were really rich, would I be able to run such a small shop?" Han Yongchang also laughed and said sincerely, "Child Li, since you said something reliable, I'll also say something reliable. I can see that you, Child Li, have an extraordinary temperament. You must not be an ordinary person. Although you are trapped here at the moment, you will definitely spread your wings and soar in the future. As the saying goes, don't bully a poor young man. I, Han Yongchang, am not a person who is greedy for money. Today, I'll say it here. No matter how much you pay, I'll take this job." Li Yundong was overjoyed when he heard this. "Well, with your words, I'll make friends with you. However, don't skimp on the work." After that, he and Han Yongchang both laughed. Seeing that the 2 of them were talking happily, Xueqi smiled and said to Han Yongchang, "Mr. Han, let's talk inside. By the way, we can see how the design is going to work." Li Yundong smiled and said to Xueqi, "Take Zi Yuan and Mr. Han inside to have a look. I'll have a few words with Su Chan." Li Yundong waited for them to enter the shop. Then he gently stroked Su Chan's soft black hair and said with emotion, "Just now, this man said, 'Don't bully a poor young man.' I suddenly remembered the days when the 2 of us were driven to the streets. Then I remembered that after I met you, I really didn't seem to let you live a really comfortable life. There were always all kinds of things that made you secretly worried. Sometimes, I would wonder what we would do if our shop didn't make any money. We will really have to beg for food. At that time, will I still be able to protect you, a fairy on earth?" Su Chan obediently held Li Yundong's arm and leaned against his side like a little bird. She looked at her lover in front of her with infatuation in her eyes and said softly, "Sir, I'm already very satisfied. I came through when I was at my poorest. In the future, it will definitely be better. And no matter how poor I am, as long as I don't die, I will eventually succeed. I believe that the man I like is a man of indomitable spirit. In the future, he will definitely be a great hero who can shake the world. How can this kind of daily necessities be difficult for him? Moreover, at that time you will be so powerful. Will you still remember a little fox spirit like me? Li Yundong sighed in his heart when he heard this. He suddenly remembered the conversation he had with Su Chan in the rental house and couldn't help but say, "As long as you don't leave me, I won't abandon you. The heavens and the earth can testify to this." Are you stupid? Why did you suddenly say that? It's weird. Although Su Chan's mouth was angry, her heart was filled with sweetness. The little girl stretched out her hand and clasped her fingers tightly with Li Yundong's, as if she would never let go in 3 lifetimes. The two of them snuggled up tightly, as if they were going to merge into one. They stood on the street and looked at each other. For a moment, they seemed to be in a daze. Just as they were looking at each other in infatuation, suddenly, an extremely harsh voice came in. "Oh, it's you guys? You guys haven't broken up yet?" When Li Yundong heard this, anger rose from the bottom of his heart. Motherf asterisk cur. Who the hell dares to curse me and Su Chan? He thought. He turned his head and saw a fat middle-aged woman standing not far away, sizing them up. Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed out loud when he saw the woman. This woman was none other than the landlady who had driven them out of their rental house and forced them to live on the streets. Well, the asterisk is almost here. Chapter 365. Go to watch net. As soon as Li Yundong saw the landlady, he thought to himself, "It can't be such a coincidence, can it? I was just thinking about how you drove us out before, and now you're here? Are you that amazing?" Su Chan also widened her eyes. She pointed at the landlady and stammered, "Aren't you that?" The landlady seemed to have been living a good life recently. Although she was fat, she was dressed in famous brand clothes. She also had big and small bags in her hands, and her face was ruddy. It was obvious that she had made a small fortune and was particularly proud. Go to watch net. She hadn't expected to meet her former tenant on the pedestrian street. For a moment, she couldn't help but sneer when she saw the couple being affectionate on the street as if there was no one else around. But who was Li Yundong? Li Yundong was not a person who liked to be at a disadvantage. His cultivation was extremely strong, and his eloquence was also very good. He immediately retorted sarcastically, "So it's you? You're still alive?" The landlady's face suddenly became very ugly. She had wanted to say something sarcastic to this annoying guy and then leave. She hadn't expected that Li Yundong's tongue would be as sharp as a knife. He didn't give her any face at all, which put her in a difficult position. The landlady thought to herself, "Wow, how dare you quarrel with me? Since I drove you away last time, I have been very lucky. It can be seen that you are a jinx. Now you are so depressed, but you still dare to challenge me." The landlady sneered and said, "Of course I'm alive, and I'm living a good life." As she said this, she made a coquettish pose and showed off her famous brands. She pointed to her bag and said, "Do you know what brand it is? Louis Vuitton. 1V. One bag costs tens of thousands. Do you dare to buy one for your own woman? You don't dare, do you? I dare. I dare to buy one for myself. Women should be more ruthless to themselves. As for you. By the way, didn't you say how great your man was? What about now? How is it?" Su Chan was disgusted by the landlady who had driven them out of their comfort zone. She sneered and said, "Of course. You're so fat, so of course you have to be harder on yourself. You want to find a man who can buy you this bag, but can you find one?" Su Chan's words hit the landlady's soft spot. She was so angry that her face turned pale and her lips trembled. She pointed at Su Chan and stuttered, You bitch. What did you just say? Besides seducing men, what else can you seduce?" Li Yundong saw that the landlady was so angry that her eyes bulged. He laughed and said, "I'm sorry, my little girl only knows how to seduce me, and I like being seduced by her very much. But I don't know who you want to seduce, landlady. Who would want to be seduced by you?" The landlady was furious. She was so angry that she cursed, "I used to be pretty too. Why are you so smug about it? If you have the ability, you can still be as beautiful as you are now in 30 years. This sentence was exactly what Li Yundong and Su Chan were proud of. Ordinary people were afraid of aging, illness, and death, but cultivators were not. The two of them looked at each other and smiled knowingly. Li Yundong suddenly felt that it was really embarrassing for two cultivators to quarrel with such a shrew in the street. He smiled at Su Chan and said, "Forget it. Let's ignore her and go in." Seeing that the two of them were about to leave, the landlady thought that she had won, so she said proudly, "Humph, you can still be proud for 2 more years while you're still young. Li Yundong, let me tell you, don't think that you're young and handsome now. It's useless for a man to rely on his face. When the time comes, you'll be penniless. I want to see if you can protect the woman around you." Li Yundong turned his face and glanced at her sideways. He sneered and didn't answer her. Su Chan turned around and said seriously, "The man I like must be a great hero. No matter what he does, he will do it to the best of his ability. He was poor before, but it doesn't mean that he will be poor in the future." As she said this, Su Chan pointed to the shop behind her. "This is the shop that my Yundong bought. Yundong said that in the future, we will open 2, 3, or even more than a dozen shops like this and open them all over the world." After Su Chan said this, the landlady burst into laughter. Her laughter was full of disdain. She pointed at Li Yundong and Su Chan and said, "Just you two? You're talking in your sleep in broad daylight and yawning like a toad. What a big tone. I'm dying of laughter. Do you think that doing business is so simple? How dare you say such big words with such a small shop?" Su Chan's face turned red from her sarcasm. She said angrily, "Why do you look down on me?" The landlady snorted and sneered. "No reason. I just don't like you. How dare you say such arrogant words at such a young age? Who do you think you are?" Su Chan was so angry that she was about to speak, but Li Yundong suddenly raised his hand and stopped her. Li Yundong smiled and said to the landlady, "Do you dare to make a bet with me?" The landlady squinted at Li Yundong. "What bet?" Li Yundong smiled slightly, pointed to the shop behind him, and said, "I will open this shop all over the country within 3 years, and then all over the world. Do you dare to make a bet with me?" Seeing that Li Yundong was calm and composed, the landlady was secretly shocked. For the first time, she couldn't help but start to seriously look at the boy in front of her. In her eyes, this boy could not be compared to before, whether in appearance or temperament. In the past, when she had driven him out, this boy had been full of immaturity and inexperience. But now, his whole body was covered with a strong aura, like a green pine standing proudly in the sky, vigorous and powerful. His words revealed a sense of calmness and confidence. This was a kind of temperament that had been cultivated through countless storms, and it was not something that could be imitated. The landlady looked at Li Yundong doubtfully, and then looked at the shop behind him. She couldn't help asking, "What kind of shop are you running?" Although she didn't like Li Yundong and Su Chan, she was not stupid. She deliberately asked Li Yundong, if he opened an international chain store, then she would fall into his trap if she made a bet with him. Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak, but Su Chan rushed to say loudly, "Listen carefully. Our Yundong runs a tea shop called De Sanxian." "Tea shop?" The landlady's hanging heart suddenly returned to her stomach. She asked with a strange expression, "Is it a tea shop or a tea shop?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "A tea shop." The landlady laughed out loud. "A tea shop wants to open all over the world?" "I'm dying of laughter. How is that possible?" Li Yundong asked. "Foreigners can open coffee shops in China. Why can't Chinese people open tea shops all over the world? China's tea culture has a long history, and it has a tradition of thousands of years. Tea is not only a beverage, but also can cure diseases and make people live longer. It's because no one has done this that I dare to say that I will succeed." The landlady was not willing to believe Li Yundong's big words. She sneered and said, "Well, I'll make a bet with you. Tell me, how do you want to bet?" Li Yundong chuckled. He stretched out 2 fingers and said lightly, "If I lose, I'll stab my own eyes. If you lose, you'll crawl back and forth on this street like a dog." When the landlady heard this, her face suddenly changed. She had never seen such a vicious bet before. Li Yundong's tone made it sound as if he was going to stab someone else's eye instead of his own. She thought to herself, "How dare this guy make such a bet? Is he bluffing? Yes, 3 years later. Who knows whether this guy will be dead or alive? Maybe he will run away at that time. He won't remember this bet. It's just that he wants to vent his anger now. Well, he must be bluffing. The landlady made up her mind and said with a sneer, "Well, who will be a witness?" As soon as she finished speaking, a voice immediately came from the side. "I'll be a witness." Li Yundong and Su Chan turned their heads and looked in the direction of the voice. They saw Zhou Ping and Wang Lingfei of the Xueqi school standing not far away and slowly walking over. Li Yundong frowned and thought to himself, "Why are these guys like ghosts? Why are they everywhere?" Zhou Ping glanced at Li Yundong, then smiled at the landlady and said, "I'll be a notary for you." Li Yundong looked at the two of them and sneered. "Where's your fat Shirdi?" Zhou Ping's face changed. She said coldly, "You don't have to worry about him. He's fine." The landlady looked at the two uninvited guests in confusion, then at Li Yundong. She asked suspiciously, "Do you know each other?" Zhou Ping sneered and said, "No, I just saw injustice on the road." Li Yundong retorted sarcastically, "I think you're meddling in other people's business." The landlady hadn't expected that the matter between her and Li Yundong would change again, but she was happy to see Li Yundong suffer a setback. She clapped her hands and said, "Since there's a witness, it's easy. Li Yundong, remember what you said. 3 years later, humph, I'll wait for you to stab your own eyes." As she spoke, she didn't want to get involved with these people, so she turned around and left. Su Chan was so angry that she shouted at her back, "You must be the one crawling like a dog. My Yundong won't lose." Li Yundong smiled and touched the girl's head. Then, he put on a serious face and said to Zhou Ping and Wang Lingfei, "Do you have anything else to say? If there's nothing else, I won't keep you company." Surprisingly, Zhou Ping didn't make trouble. She smiled and said, "Zhenren Li, please go ahead." Li Yundong snorted and walked into the shop with the girl. As soon as the two of them entered, Su Chan took Li Yundong's arm worriedly and said, "Yundong, will our shop make money?" Li Yundong hugged her dotingly and said with a confident smile, "Don't worry, I have a way. Except for that time against your master. When have you ever seen me lose?" Only then did Su Chan feel relieved. She giggled and put her arms around Li Yundong's strong waist, saying, "Of course, my Yundong is invincible in the world, even in business." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You're bragging a little too much." At this time, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were coming down from the second floor. Zi Yuan walked up to Li Yundong and looked at Zhou Ping and Wang Lingfei outside the shop. She asked in a low voice, "What happened?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "It's nothing. I just drove away a fly." After that, he asked Zi Yuan in confusion, "Are these two guys targeting us now?" Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said softly, "If the Zhengi school wants to annex the Linggong sect, they must first cut off our source of income, and then they can force us to give in. If they don't cut off our source of income, they won't be able to force us to compromise. So, Li Yundong, you must be mentally prepared." In the past, Zhou Ping could be said to be a battle of pride, but now, it is a cruel battle of interests. The battle of interests between sects is not as modest and plain as that between cultivators. It is full of bloody fighting. You must not be careless, or it will be a disaster. Li Yundong's face was solemn. He nodded and said, "You're right. It can be seen from the fact that the major sects besieged the Fox Zen school. But don't worry, if they come in the open, I'm not afraid. But if they come in the dark, I don't believe that these tricks can win against us. As you once said, the real art of tea can't be framed by tricks." As he spoke, his eyes also followed Zi Yuan to look at Zhou Ping and Wang Lingfei, who were outside the door. Their eyes met through the glass, and countless sparks immediately arose. Wang Lingfei looked at Li Yundong and snorted coldly. He said to Zhou Ping unhappily, "This guy looks really annoying. I only hate that my powerful magical weapon hasn't been refined yet." Zhou Ping smiled and said, "To defeat a person, you don't necessarily have to fight. Since they want to do business, I will fulfill their wish. Do they think it is so easy to make money in business?" Wang Lingfei said, "Do you have any good ideas?" Zhou Ping snorted, and a trace of ferocity suddenly appeared on her face. "Isn't it easy for our Zhengi school to cut off people's source of income? However, there is no need to do that now. I want him to open the shop, and then I will destroy it. I want them to be completely deserted. There will be no customers and they won't be able to make a penny. Let's go back first. My master still has to refine the 2 sword souls today. Chapter 366. Go to Watch Network. By the time Li Yundong and the others returned home, it was already evening. After dinner, everyone returned to their respective rooms to cultivate. Li Yundong waited until late at night, then flew to the roof. Go to the watch net. See. When he arrived at the roof, he saw that Zi Yuan was already waiting for him. Li Yundong smiled and said, "You're so early. I came a little earlier." Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "Then should I be like Huang Shigong and ask you to go back first and come back another day?" Li Yundong knew that Zi Yuan was talking about an illusion. He quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, No, I'm not Zhang Liang, who saves the world, and you're not Huang Shigong, who appears and disappears mysteriously. You don't have to do this." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Let's go back to Mount Longhu." After that, her figure turned into a blue light and flew away like lightning. Li Yundong also flew behind her. The 2 of them flew extremely fast. Tiannan City was not far from Mount Longhu. After about 2 hours, the 2 of them arrived at Mount Longhu. Li Yundong said to Zi Yuan in midair, "This is the sphere of influence of the Xueqi school. Aren't you afraid of being discovered by them?" Zi Yuan chuckled and said, "Mount Longhu is very big. The sphere of influence of the Xueqi school has not expanded to the point where they would know if a person entered within 100 miles. Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then I overestimated them." However, Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "No. This is mainly because the power of the Xueqi school has declined greatly since the Ming and Qing dynasties. In the middle of the Ming dynasty, when the Xueqi school was at its peak, the Shangqing Palace of Mount Longhu was not only full of magic circles, but there was also an earth-shattering Sanju formation in the Taoist master's mansion. Even if an immortal entered, his body and soul would be destroyed and turned into powder. At that time, everyone within 100 miles was a cultivator. Regardless of whether they were men or women, old or young, they were all spies of the Xueqi school. Not to mention a person coming in, even if a fly flew in, the Xueqi school would know whether it was male or female." Li Yundong gasped. Was the Xueqi school so powerful at that time? Zi Yuan sighed and said, "Yes, the predecessor of the Xueqi school, Zhang Daoling, the leader of the 5 Pecks of Rice sect, achieved great success in cultivation and alchemy in Mount Longhu. Starting from Zhang Shang, the 4th generation of Taoist masters at the end of the Han dynasty, all the Taoist masters of the past generations lived here. They entrenched themselves in Mount Longhu in search of immortals and techniques, sat in the Shangqing Palace to teach and preach, and lived in the Taoist master's mansion to cultivate their moral character. Until today, they had inherited the orthodoxy for 63 generations, and they had guarded it for more than 1,800 years. Moreover, almost every generation of Taoist master had been worshipped and conferred titles by the feudal dynasties. In the history of our country, only one great aristocratic family can compare to it. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he blurted out, "Sage Confucius?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "That's right. In the history of China's culture, there are only 2 great families that have been passed down from generation to generation. They are the South Zhang and the North Kong. The South has Taoist Master Zhang, and the North has Sage Confucius." Although there had been a lot of friction between Li Yundong and the Xueqi school, when he heard Zi Yuan's words, he immediately respected the history of the Xueqi school and was in awe of it. He looked down in mid-air and looked at Mount Longhu with the help of the starlight and moonlight. Li Yundong saw that the peaks under his feet stretched for dozens of miles, and the mountain range stretched endlessly, like dozens of big dragons sleeping. The mountains were like dragons coiling and tigers crouching. The dragons and tigers were fighting for supremacy, not giving in. Between the mountains, a clear stream of water floated in from the east. It flowed slowly along the mountains, circling the peaks, as if taking a rest or admiring the scenery. The beach was white, and the pool was green. In this quiet forest, there were occasional bird chirps and animal cries. Occasionally, one could vaguely hear the soft and elegant voice of a Taoist priest chanting sutras. Li Yundong's eyes were clear and his spirit was refreshed. There seemed to be an infinite heroic feeling in his chest. He let out a long breath, and his breath was long and leisurely, as if he wanted to swallow dragons and tigers. The chi he had cultivated for a night was not even comparable to the chi of heaven and earth that had been nourished by looking at this magnificent river and mountain. It's really a paradise of immortals. Li Yundong sighed. Seeing that Li Yundong was lost in thought while looking at Mount Longhu, Zi Yuan said with a smile. Now do you know why all the cultivation sects must be in the mountains? Don't be discouraged. When you earn enough money, Mount Tianlong will naturally return to your hands. At that time, you will also have your own cultivation house. Li Yundong laughed and said, Thank you. Come on, let's go down. Zi Yuan flew down with Li Yundong. At this time, the two of them entered Mount Longhu. It was different from looking down from the sky before. Zi Yuan took Li Yundong all the way through the mountains, introducing him to the beautiful scenery of the mountains. Zi Yuan said, There are 99 peaks and 24 rocks in Mount Longhu, all of which are taken from the softest streams around the mountain and the masculine of the 99 dragons. The mountain elixir is green and full of spirituality. When the Taoist master of every generation descends to the world, dragons and tigers will appear, and the sky will be covered with clouds. Li Yundong laughed and said, I just don't know why the Xueqi school has declined in such a treasured land. Zi Yuan sighed and said, During the Republic of China, there was a war between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party and the war of resistance against Japan. Mount Longhu was also affected, and many Taoist schools were repeatedly destroyed. After the founding of the People's Republic, only the Gate Tower, the Wu Chao Gate, the Bell Tower, the Dismount Pavilion, the Dongyin Courtyard, and other buildings remained in the huge Mount Longhu. During the 10 years of turmoil, these buildings were all destroyed, and not a single one was left. Back then, the cultivation sects of the Supreme Taoist Masters were like this. You can imagine what kind of impact the other sects suffered. As Zi Yuan spoke, she suddenly smiled and said, Now that the country has reopened its control over the cultivation world, the Xueqi school can't wait to restore its former glory. Therefore, the first thing they have to do is to gather the branch sects that were scattered in the past, gather all the forces that can be gathered, and then unify the cultivation world and be the only one in the world. Li Yundong chuckled and said, So they found you, and they bumped into me. So, we formed a feud with the Xueqi school. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. The two of them walked like the wind. Not long after, they arrived at a side peak of Mount Longhu. Zi Yuan came to the door of the Taoist temple. She looked up and saw 2 dazzling seals pasted on the door. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and raised her hand. The seal moved without any wind, and before long, it fell to the ground. Let's go to the Sutras Pavilion. Zi Yuan gently pushed the door open and said to Li Yundong in a soft voice. Li Yundong nodded and followed Zi Yuan inside. Along the way, Li Yundong saw that the Taoist temple was in a mess, as if the Red Guards had passed through. Zi Yuan said lightly, Since the 10 years of turmoil, our Linggong sect has never suffered such a catastrophe. I didn't expect that today's disaster would come from our own sect. What a pity. Li Yundong saw all this. He smiled and comforted her. It doesn't matter. We will get these things back sooner or later. Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong, smiled non-committally, and continued to lead the way. Li Yundong followed Zi Yuan through a cave residence and a lotus pond. Finally, they arrived in front of a stone cave. Zi Yuan turned to Li Yundong and said, Wait here for a while. Li Yundong nodded. He saw that Zi Yuan was holding his sleeve with one hand, and the fingers of the other hand were flying on the smooth side of the wall, as if she was drawing some kind of talisman. After a while, a golden talisman appeared on the smooth side of the wall, and then it became brighter and brighter, and then disappeared. After a while, there was a cracking sound coming from inside the wall. Not long after, a groove frame protruded from the wall, and there was a jade plate on it. Zi Yuan reached out and took the jade plate down. After a while, the groove frame automatically retracted, and there was no sign of any mechanism on the wall. Li Yundong asked curiously, So magical? Are all your things hidden in the wall? Zi Yuan explained with a smile, Every sect has its own treasure hiding place. The treasure of our Linggong sect is hidden in the wall of the cave residence. There are invisible magic circles and talismans everywhere on the wall. If someone wants to force it open with external force, it will only cause all the collections inside to be destroyed. Only by knowing the correct way to open it can you take out what you want from it. Li Yundong smiled and said, "This is really magical." Zi Yuan solemnly handed the jade plate in her hand to Li Yundong, but when he reached out to take it, she shrank it back again and said with a serious expression, "Li Yundong, before you learn the thunder method, you must first promise me that you will never use this kind of magic to do evil things. Otherwise, even if God doesn't punish you, I will." Li Yundong's face was full of solemnity. He said word by word, "Don't worry, I, Li Yundong, will not do those evil things. If I violate you, I will be struck by lightning." A smile appeared on Zi Yuan's face. She gently placed the jade plate in Li Yundong's hand and said, "I believe in your character. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taught you the 5 Thunder Jade Book. I just taught you the 5 Thunder Jade Book according to the rules." Li Yundong took the jade plate in his hand. At a glance, he saw that the jade plate was emerald green. In the middle of the plate, there was a paragraph of text engraved with golden text. The text was dark green, and the edge of the jade plate was vermilion, like a formation. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Isn't it the 5 Thunder Jade Book? Why is it a jade plate?" Zi Yuan said with a smile, "Does it have to be made of paper to be called a book? This is a magical item passed down to me by my master. It is engraved with the 5 Thunder Righteous method of the Shinshao sect. I haven't learned it myself. You can take a look at it yourself. With your cultivation, you will get twice the result with half the effort." Li Yundong nodded in agreement. He looked down at the jade plate and saw a few big words written on the first line. It was, "Thunder is the cardinal of heaven and earth. Thunder is the command of heaven, and it has the greatest power. Everything in the 3 realms and 9 earths is under the control of thunder." Even though these words were small, they revealed a strand of powerful, vast, and imposing aura that caused one's mind to be refreshed. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong deeply and said meaningfully, "Li Yundong, from ancient times to the present, any cultivator who can cultivate the 5 Thunders method is a great cultivator who will leave his name in history. From now on, the magic you cultivate will be beyond the 5 elements and stand above all living beings." "I'm going back to Shanghai this week. I'm really tired. I've been reading 3 times for 7 days in a row." Chapter 367. Go to Watch Network. Hearing Zi Yuan's words, Li Yundong's heart stirred, but he suppressed his excitement and asked, "Your cultivation is about the same as mine. Why can't you practice the 5 Thunders?" Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, "Because I am a woman with 5 punctures, and I am also a Xianyin virgin." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "What does this have to do with learning thunder magic? Isn't Ao Wushuang also a woman with no punctures? Why did I hear Su Chan say that she knows the 5 Thunders?" Zi Yuan explained with a smile, "In fact, it's very simple. The ancients often said that thunder is the mother of lightning. From this word, it can be seen that only men can use thunder, and what we can drive is electricity. Go to 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Is there a difference between thunder and electricity?" Zi Yuan chuckled and said, "Of course there is a difference. Electricity is a derivative of thunder, and thunder itself not only has the attribute of electricity, but also has an extremely strong destructive and explosive ability. Above the 5 Thunders, there are 9 thunders and heavenly thunders. When heavenly thunders are raging, rivers and mountains will be blasted into pieces, but electricity does not have this power. In other words, if you want to drive thunder, you need extremely strong yang qi as a backing and support. I am a virgin, and the yuan yang power in my body is only enough for me to cultivate the yang spirit, not enough to drive the 5 thunders. As for Ao Wushuang, she once had sex with my master. They exchanged yin and yang qi, so Ao Wushuang has extremely strong yuan yang qi in her body. That's why she can use the 5 thunders, but I can't." Only then did Li Yundong understand. He nodded and blurted out, "Then if you find a man, you can also." After Li Yundong said this, he felt that it was inappropriate. At this time, Zi Yuan's face was already red, and she glared at him with shame and anger. She said angrily, "I'm kind enough to teach you magic cultivation. How dare you make fun of me?" Li Yundong was used to seeing Zi Yuan's calm and indifferent appearance, and he was already somewhat immune to her beauty. At this time, when he saw her embarrassed and angry, she actually increased her charm, especially when he looked at a beauty under the moonlight. For a moment, Li Yundong's heart couldn't help but thump wildly. He coughed awkwardly and smiled awkwardly. I just said it casually. Don't think too much about it. Zi Yuan felt that her cheeks and ears were burning. She glared at Li Yundong fiercely and said, hurry up and memorize all the above words. Go back and practice them slowly. Li Yundong laughed dryly and quickly lowered his head to look at the Five Thunders jade book in his hand. But after reading it for a while, Li Yundong only felt that his heart was in a mess. It was as if he could feel Zi Yuan's sharp and angry eyes staring at him. Li Yundong simply recited all the words on the Five Thunders jade book to calm his mind. He held the Five Thunders jade book in his hand and said, One Qi and Spirit, returning to the root and returning to life. Walking, standing, sitting, and lying down are continuous. Therefore, the one who cultivates the noble spirit and applies it to the law is to use my true Qi and the creation of heaven and earth. Therefore it can be called Qi and thunder. Li Yundong read for a while, and his mind gradually calmed down. Gradually, his heart and Qi became one, and he entered a state of forgetting himself and everything else. Every word he read was clearly printed in his mind. After he finished reading it, he sat cross-legged on the ground and fell into deep thought and meditation. Zi Yuan saw that he began to understand the Tao on the spot. Obviously, he had just read the sutra and understood something in his heart, so she consciously stood to the side to protect him. After reading these ancient books, Li Yundong had a preliminary understanding of the way of thunder and lightning in his heart. Not only was there the original text in the Five Thunders Jade Book, but there were also very small annotations in the gaps. One of the annotations was particularly clear to Li Yundong. On it was written, the cultivation of the thunder arts also paid special attention to the cultivation of the inner core, and advocated the Tao body dharma usage, which was to cultivate the inner core and the Tao as the foundation, and externally, to form all kinds of divine abilities and mysterious magical skills. Once the Niden is formed, the innate Qi will be full. This innate Qi is also known as the innate ancestral Qi and the Hunyuan Qi. Our Taoism says one Qi into three pure ones. This Qi is the Hunyuan Qi, and the Hunyuan Qi is the Tao. Wang Shichen prays to Ba Duanjin explained the thunder magic very clearly. With this Qi, heaven and earth will change constantly. Man is the spirit of all things. With this Qi, he can feel the heaven and earth, move ghosts and gods, breathe in wind, cloud, thunder, and rain, and go everywhere. And under this small annotation it was written, if people can gather the Qi of the five elements into the five thunders, then the thunder magic is the innate Tao, and the god of thunder is my god. From this, it could be seen that people could actually rely on the Qi of the five elements to create their own thunder. There was no need to completely borrow the Hunyuan Qi between heaven and earth. Thinking of this, Li Yundong gathered the Qi of the five internal organs in his body into his dantian. He wanted to see what the thunder and lightning driven by the Qi of the five elements looked like. With a thought, the Qi of the five internal organs rushed out, like countless wild horses out of the gate, and rushed to the lower dantian in his lower abdomen. When ordinary cultivators practiced Qi, the Qi of a certain visceral Qi passed through the Niden and then quickly flowed away, forming a continuous Qi like flowing water. Li Yundong transferred the Qi of the five internal organs to the lower dantian in his lower abdomen. This time, the Qi of the five elements in the five internal organs had no place to go. They all gathered together, and the Qi of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth surged back and forth, shaking each other. Li Yundong suddenly felt that the lower dantian in his lower abdomen seemed to have turned into a big drum. There was a rumbling sound inside, as if thunder and lightning were brewing. An extremely powerful force was surging in his lower abdomen, with no place to vent. Li Yundong only brewed it for a while before he felt that the force was getting stronger and stronger. Gradually, he couldn't control it, and there was a faint pain in his lower abdomen. Li Yundong was secretly shocked. He knew that since he had reached the Xueqi phase, his body had been extremely strong, especially his internal organs, which were as hard as iron. If all the Qi in his body gathered together and attacked a certain internal organ or weapon palace, it wouldn't cause such a painful feeling. However, it had only been a minute since he had started Qi, and his lower dantian could no longer withstand the Qi. There were signs that it was about to explode. Li Yundong quickly controlled the Qi to move it to the dantian above his head. At the same time, he opened the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of his head, and an extremely powerful force instantly gushed out from his Bai Hui acupoint. There was a loud bang, as if there was a thunderclap. At this time, they were in the cave. The loud noise was really deafening. Even though Zi Yuan's cultivation was profound, she still felt a sharp pain in her eardrums. She couldn't help but frown. At this time, Li Yundong woke up from his meditation. He said with lingering fear, "It's so powerful. Just now, the lower dantian in my lower abdomen almost exploded." Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong speechlessly and said, "You haven't learned to walk yet, but you want to learn to run. First you should slowly master this power, and then step by step, deepen and increase the strength of this power. Don't think about doing it overnight. There will be problems. If there is a problem with practicing thunder magic, not to mention me, even the Jade Emperor can't save you." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's okay. I just want to try the thunder magic driven by the qi of the 5 elements. Later, I'll try the thunder magic driven by the qi of mixed elements and see how it works." Before Zi Yuan could speak, Li Yundong had already entered meditation. After a while, his primordial spirit went out of his body and went straight into the air. Zi Yuan couldn't stop it. Zi Yuan sighed and thought to herself, Li Yundong, don't mess around. This is Mount Longhu. This is the most powerful place in the world. If you make any trouble, it will be difficult to clean up." While Li Yundong and Zi Yuan were practicing thunder magic on the side peak, in the Shangqing Palace on the main peak of Mount Longhu, the Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling, was refining the soul of Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who she had brought back. In this palace, there was a huge magic circle in front of Zhang Ling. The magic circle was surrounded by the 8 trigrams of heaven and earth, and in the middle was Yin-Yang Tai Chi. 2 water platforms were placed on the 2 points of Yin and Yang. The water platforms were full of all kinds of black and white talismans and patterns. In the middle of the magic circle, 2 lotus buds of the same color and shape could be faintly seen. In the buds, 2 small people could be faintly seen emitting a faint fluorescent light. The 2 little people were curled up like babies, but they were only the size of a thumb. Through the pink lotus leaves, one could see that they had all 4 limbs, and even their toes could be clearly seen. The Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling, stared at the field with a strong sense of love and joy in her eyes. Next to her stood her disciple, Zhou Ping. Zhou Ping looked at her in confusion and said curiously, "Master, I have something to ask, but I don't know if I should ask." Zhang Ling didn't look at her. She just focused on the field and asked, "Say it. Is there anything else we can't say between us?" Zhou Ping clasped her hands together and asked respectfully and doubtfully, "Master, I can understand that you want to use these twin souls to make sword souls, but why did you go through so much trouble to set up such a formation?" Zhang Ling smiled slightly. Instead of answering, she asked, "Do you know what kind of formation this is?" Zhou Ping nodded and said, "Yes, it's the 5 elements reincarnation formation." Zhang Ling turned her head and looked at her with approval. "Oh, then do you know how to use this formation?" Zhou Ping smiled and said, "Of course I do. The main purpose of this formation is to help people get rid of the memories of their past and present lives, so that they can be reborn." Zhang Ling smiled and said, "Since you know what this formation is for, why are you still asking me this question?" Zhou Ping said in confusion, "But what's the use of this for them?" Zhang Ling snorted and said, "You only know one thing, but not the other. We snatched this pair of twin souls from the cave residents of the Linggong sect. Their origins are unknown. Do you know who they were originally? Do you know anything about them? Once these 2 people become the 2 sword spirits of the Sanju formation, the power of the Sanju formation will be completely in their hands. If they still have the memories of their previous lives, once they meet an acquaintance of the past and show mercy, the Sanju formation will be completely ineffective. At that time, are you going to take responsibility, or am I going to?" Only then did Zhou Ping come to a realization. She smiled and said, "Master, you're really thoughtful. I was careless. However, these twins seem to be coming to this world at any time." As if to confirm her words, the pair of identical flower buds suddenly emitted bursts of colorful light. Then, one petal after another slowly opened, revealing 2 identical pink and tender figures. Seeing this, Zhang Ling's expression suddenly became serious. She quickly pinched her fingers and shouted, "Pinger, protect me. I'm going to cast a spell to erase their memories of their previous lives." At this moment, in the sky outside the side palace of Shangqing Palace, there was a loud and powerful sound of thunder. Chapter 368. Go to the net. For just as Zhang Ling was about to erase Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's memories of their previous lives, Li Yundong's young spirit was mobilizing the qi of heaven and earth in midair and driving the thunder away. To watch the net. The art of 5 thunders was extremely difficult to say, but as long as one's kung fu was good enough, it was extremely simple to use. Li Yundong used the yang spirit to mobilize the Hunyuan qi between heaven and earth. At first, he couldn't find out what the Hunyuan qi between heaven and earth was, but not long after, when he mobilized the purest zhenqi in his body, the wind and clouds began to surge between heaven and earth. Especially when he used the 5 qis unifying in mind, the Hunyuan qi between heaven and earth and the qi of the 5 internal organs in his own small universe automatically connected. At this moment, Li Yundong had a feeling that he was one with heaven and man, and that the universe of heaven and earth and his own small universe had become one. It was as if he had suddenly become infinitely large. His eyes were the gaze of the sky, and his feet were the thickness of the earth. With a thought, Li Yundong felt that the water between the earth and the sky began to evaporate from the bottom to the top. These water droplets gathered and collided in the air, gradually forming thick dark clouds one after another. Then, Li Yundong could feel an inexplicable force between heaven and earth gathering in the clouds. This force was connected to the qi of his 5 internal organs. He could mobilize it, drive it, and command it. At first, Li Yundong was wild with excitement. He suddenly realized that he could actually drive thunder and lightning. He actually knew the most powerful magic in the world. But not long after, Li Yundong couldn't be happy anymore. The speed of the power gathering in the clouds was far beyond Li Yundong's imagination. At first, Li Yundong felt like he was riding a fierce horse. Although the horse was fierce, he could still control it. But then one horse became 2 horses, and 2 horses became 4 horses. Not long after, it became a scene of thousands of horses galloping. How could he control it? Li Yundong suddenly felt that he was in a difficult position. If he gave up controlling this power, it would backfire on him. But if he casually released this power, he was afraid that it would hit the secular mortals. At that time, there would be another heavenly tribulation, and then he would be in big trouble. Li Yundong thought for a while, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He looked at the main peak of Mount Longhu, where Xueqi Palace was located. He looked down from above and saw that the rebuilt Xueqi Palace was sitting in the lush forest. He could faintly see the cornices, dugong, and Taoist memorial arches. He couldn't help but think, the Zhangyi school has repeatedly gone against Ziyuan, and they are so aggressive against me and the Fox Zen school. I might as well give this heavenly thunder to the Zhangyi school. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong simply guided this power to the position of Xueqi Palace on Mount Longhu. He had originally wanted to hit the main hall of Xueqi Palace, but it was the first time he had used the thunder method, so it was inevitable that it would be a little impure. With a boom, the heavenly thunder hit a side palace of Xueqi Palace. Coincidentally, this side palace happened to be where Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping were. When the heavenly lightning struck down, it immediately broke the roof tiles of the side palace and fell heavily on the heads of the 2 people. Zhang Ling reacted very quickly. The moment the heavenly thunder was about to fall, all the hair on her body immediately stood on end. She instantly crushed a talisman hidden in her sleeve, raised her hand, and pointed her finger in the air. Quick! With a rumbling sound, a wall of fire appeared above their heads. When the heavenly lightning struck the wall of fire, it was as if the heavenly lightning struck the fire. It immediately caused a violent explosion, and black smoke quickly enveloped all of them. Not long after, the lady of the earthly fire covered her nose with one hand and waved her sleeve with the other. A strong gust of wind was produced from the cuff of her sleeve, which quickly dispersed the thick black smoke in the hall. She fixed her eyes on Zhou Ping and saw that her beautiful and precious disciple had become a kitchen god. She had a black mouth and a black face. When she opened her mouth, even her teeth were black. The lady of the earthly fire took a deep breath and said angrily, "Who dares to be presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Are you tired of living?" Her shout immediately spread far and wide, causing the mountains to tremble, and the echoes continued to echo. Zhou Ping didn't react at all. She couldn't understand why she had almost been hit by a heavenly thunder on the main peak of Mount Longhu. She was still in shock. Her eyes widened as she stammered, Master, what's going on? Where did the heavenly thunder come from?" Just as the lady of the earthly fire was about to speak, she glanced around and suddenly saw that in the array of the main hall, The souls of Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had still been born. They were quietly lying on the blooming lotus platform, sleeping peacefully. They were naked from head to toe, and their skin was as pink as jelly. It was as if they could be poked with a finger. The Lady of the Earthly Fire immediately stomped her feet and sighed. It's too late. The two sword souls have already been born. It's too late to erase their memories of their previous lives. Alas, could this be the will of the heavens? Zhou Ping also said angrily, "Damn it, I don't know who dared to strike Mount Longhu with lightning. It's like saying filial piety in front of Confucius and showing off in front of Guan Yu. He's overestimating himself. Does he think that our Mount Longhu is easy to bully?" After that, she suddenly rose into the air and looked for the person who had attracted the lightning in all directions. As soon as Zhou Ping rose into the air, she saw many people flying from the side palaces and halls around her. Most of them were wearing Taoist robes. As soon as they saw Zhou Ping, they asked loudly, "Little Xueqi, what happened just now?" Zhou Ping opened her mouth and was about to say that a thief had attacked Mount Longhu, but Zhang Ling appeared beside her and held her down with one hand, not letting her speak. Zhang Ling replied loudly, "Nothing. Just now, my disciple had a problem with her thunder cultivation. Senior brothers and junior brothers, I've troubled you." These flying Taoists had all heard Zhang Ling's roar before, and their hearts were as clear as a mirror. They didn't expose her, but when they heard her words, some of them laughed and flew back to where they came from. Some of them, who usually didn't get along with Zhang Ling, said sarcastically, "Lady of the Earthly Fire, your disciple should have just played with your fire. Why did she play with thunder for no reason? Do you think that our Mount Longhu doesn't have enough Taoist temples that have been demolished?" The Lady of the Earthly Fire snorted coldly and didn't argue with them. She pulled Zhou Ping and flew back to the hall. Zhou Ping was shocked and whispered, "Master, why didn't you tell them the truth?" The Lady of the Earthly Fire sneered and said, "What should I say? Saying that our side hall was destroyed by an unknown person? Humph, if this matter spreads, we will become the laughingstock of the cultivation world the next day. Do you want to be laughed at?" Zhou Ping said anxiously, "Then are we just going to take this lying down? At the very least, we have to find out who did it." The Lady of the Earthly Fire sneered and said, "Humph, how dare he lead thunder to strike our Mount Longhu? This person is really the #1 madman since ancient times. He can't run away." After that, the Lady of the Earthly Fire sat down cross-legged on the ground and shouted to Zhou Ping, "Send the twin sword souls to the main hall. Since you can't erase their soul memories, then don't do so. This is the will of heaven, and it's not good to force it. Now, I'm going to use the heaven and earth soul-searching method to find the whereabouts of this madman. After you send the sword souls, come back and protect me. Don't let anyone take advantage of the situation later." Zhou Ping nodded in agreement. Her figure swept across the field like a swallow cutting through water. With a light turn of her wrist, her fingers picked up the souls of Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, and then she quickly took them to the main hall. On the other side of Mount Longhu, Li Yundong had just bent over with his young spirit when he saw a figure rushing in front of him and shouting in horror, "Are you crazy? How dare you strike Mount Longhu with lightning?" Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the person who was shouting like a madman was none other than Zi Yuan, who was usually as calm as a fairy. Li Yundong asked curiously, "What's so strange about that? They bully you so much every day and you still think about them? Aren't you being too kind?" Zi Yuan looked like she was about to collapse. Her face was ashen as she said quickly, "You're really crazy. There are countless masters of thunder magic in the Xueqi school. How dare you play with thunder here? You're too arrogant. Let's go, hurry up and follow me." Li Yundong laughed and was about to speak when he suddenly heard an extremely angry voice roar from the main peak. "Who dares to be so presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Are you tired of living?" This roar shook Li Yundong so much that he almost jumped up from the ground. He even felt that the soles of his feet were numb from the shock. Li Yundong was shocked and couldn't help but ask, "Who is this?" "Zhang Tianshi, the sect leader of the Xueqi school? So powerful." Zi Yuan no longer cared about her usual calmness. She hurriedly grabbed Li Yundong's arm and pulled him out of the cave. Then she quickly said, "This is the Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling. She is a great cultivator with extremely high cultivation, and is the elder sister of Zhang Tianshi of the Xueqi school. If she comes to catch us, you and I can barely resist her. But there are countless masters of cultivation in Mount Longhu. If any one of them comes, we won't be able to resist. Let's go, or we won't be able to get away. After that, she had already pulled Li Yundong out of the cave. As soon as the two of them rushed out of the cave, they looked up and saw that the sky was full of flying Taoists. They were as dense as the stars. Li Yundong would have been fine if he hadn't seen it. When he saw it, he immediately gasped. He only felt that he was sweating profusely and his scalp was numb. F***CK, we've poked a hornet's nest, Li Yundong said, dumbfounded. Zi Yuan glared at him angrily, then pulled Li Yundong and ran down the mountain. There were Taoists everywhere in the sky, so the two of them didn't dare to fly. They ran all the way out of the sphere of influence of Mount Longhu. When they saw that no one was flying in the night sky, they dared to fly into the air. After confirming that there were no pursuers behind them, they headed for Tiannan City. Zi Yuan pulled Li Yundong all the way out of Mount Longhu. Only when they were far away from Mount Longhu did she feel relieved. She let go of Li Yundong's hand and couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Did you take the wrong medicine just now? Why did you attract thunder to Mount Longhu?" Li Yundong smiled embarrassedly. "I couldn't control it." Zi Yuan looked like she was going crazy. "Then don't hit the main peak. There are 99 peaks for you to hit. Why did you hit the main peak, Shangqing Palace? Oh my god, if this matter gets out, the Zhengyi school will go crazy. We'll be on the run tomorrow." Li Yundong was shocked and said guiltily, "No way. They don't know, do they?" Zi Yuan glared at Li Yundong. Maybe they didn't find out this time, but there can't be a next time. Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, "No, absolutely not." Zi Yuan snorted and looked at Li Yundong as if she was looking at a madman. She shook her head and said, "Forget it, let's go back quickly. Don't mention what happened tonight to anyone." Li Yundong laughed dryly and said, "Of course." The two of them flew for nearly 2 hours and returned to Tiannan City. Just as they were about to land at home, they saw a figure suddenly fly up from the house. This person came so fast that he almost collided with Li Yundong in midair. Don't worry. The twins will get them back, but not now. 5. Chapter 369. Go to the internet. For Li Yundong held the person and took a closer look, only to see that it was Su Chan. Go to the internet. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong asked curiously, "It's so late. What are you doing out here?" Su Chan was also surprised. She looked at Li Yundong and then looked at Zi Yuan. She asked curiously, "Yundong, what are you and Sister Zi Yuan doing so late?" Li Yundong immediately coughed dryly and said, "I asked you first. You go first." Su Chan rolled her eyes and glanced at the two of them. Although she was a little puzzled, she didn't take it to heart. She said, "I seem to have seen a person flying out of the residence just now. I thought it was strange, so I came out to have a look. I didn't expect to see you." Li Yundong didn't take it to heart. He said, "Maybe it's a Sherbua or a little disciple of the Fox Zen school who went out to play." Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat when she heard this. She asked Su Chan, "Did you see who this person was?" Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "It seems to be Sherbua Chao Yi or Sherbua Zhuang Yuting. Their figures are a little similar, but I can't tell them apart." Zi Yuan thought for a moment and immediately said decisively, "Where did they fly to? Let's chase after them." Su Chan didn't think much about it. She pointed in a direction and said, "They flew that way." Zi Yuan said to Li Yundong, "Let's go and have a look." Li Yundong was confused. What's there to chase? Zi Yuan didn't allow him to explain. She dragged him and chased after them, saying, "You'll know when we catch up." When Su Chan saw the two of them quickly chasing after them, she also turned into a ray of green light and caught up with the two of them. The little girl followed behind them and muttered in her heart, "What's wrong with Sister Zi Yuan? Why does she look like she's facing a great enemy? However, I don't know if the person in front is Sherbua Chao Yi or Sherbua Zhuang Yuting. It's so late. What is she doing out here?" Su Chan quickly flew to the front to lead the way. Li Yundong asked in confusion. How did you see someone fly out? It's already so late. What are you doing here instead of sleeping? I wanted to ask Xueqi to help me, but when I went to her room, I didn't see her. Just as I was about to leave, I saw a figure flying past the window. I was curious, so I chased after it. I didn't expect to meet you. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and looked at Zi Yuan. He was deep in thought, but he didn't ask again. After chasing for a while, Su Chan suddenly pointed to the front and said, "Look, there." Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan looked into the distance at the same time and saw an extremely weak cyan light flash through the distant night sky. Zi Yuan and Li Yunyang immediately perked up and said, "Chase." The three of them followed the target closely and kept a distance behind it. After flying for nearly 2 hours, Zi Yuan suddenly said, "No, why do I feel like we're back in Xueqi again?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Xueqi? Could he have returned to Mount Longhu?" At this time, Su Chan stretched her head over and asked curiously again, "Why do you say again? Yundong, when did you come to Mount Longhu in Xueqi?" Li Yundong laughed dryly and quickly changed the topic. "Let's talk about this later. It's more important to keep an eye on them now." While the three of them were talking, they saw a flash of cyan light in the distance, and then it quickly fell. Zi Yuan's voice tightened as she said, "Let's go down too. It's too easy to be a target in the air." The three of them quickly descended. As soon as they landed on the ground, Li Yunyang looked around in the moonlight and saw that they were surrounded by mountains. At the foot of the mountains were fields. At this time, the autumn rice had been harvested, and there were rice seedlings everywhere. Su Chan blinked and looked around. She asked curiously, "Where are we? Could it be Mount Longhu?" She was a fox spirit, so she was naturally afraid of the places of Xianmen and Buddhism. When she thought that she was in Mount Longhu, she shuddered and felt uncomfortable. Zi Yuan looked around and roughly looked at the surrounding mountains. She shook her head and said, "It doesn't look like Mount Longhu." Li Yunyang laughed and said, "I know where we are." Su Chan and Zi Yuan both asked curiously, "Where are we?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "Zi Yuan, you're right. We're back in Xueqi. We're in Mount Gazao." Su Chan took Li Yunyang's arm and asked, "How do you know? Have you been here before?" Li Yunyang pointed to a road sign on the side of the road about a dozen meters away and said, "Isn't it written on it?" Only then did Su Chan and Zi Yuan notice that there was a road sign in the distance. However, the night was dark. If it weren't for Li Yunyang's high cultivation and strong eyesight, he wouldn't have noticed it at all. The two of them took a closer look and saw a blue road sign with white characters. On it was written, Mount Gazao National Forest Park. There was still a distance below. 2 kilometers. Zi Yuan and Su Chan suddenly laughed. Su Chan couldn't help but turn around and say angrily, "I thought you recognized the scenery here and recognized it. I just wanted to worship you. I didn't expect you to recognize it by looking at the road sign. It's so boring." Zi Yuan also smiled and said, "I didn't expect that we would follow you to Mount Gazao. But why are the people of the Fox Zen school here? This is the holy land of Taoism." Li Yunyang smiled and gestured to the two of them, saying, "Let's go. We'll talk as we walk. Let's go to the Gazao sect first to see what's going on. Su Chan, your tracking skills are good. You lead the way." "Okay." Su Chan replied crisply. Although the little girl knew that this was the holy land of Taoism and was a little afraid, when she thought of her lover beside her, she couldn't help but become bolder. Instead, she became a little excited. Li Yundong looked at Su Chan's glowing eyes and felt worried. He was afraid that she would cause a disaster like the one he had caused when he struck Mount Longhu. "Hey, don't cause trouble," he said hurriedly. Su Chan looked back at him with a smile and said, I won't. Li Yunyang turned around to greet Zi Yuan, only to see that she was looking at him strangely with a faint smile, as if to say, "As long as you don't cause trouble, everything will be fine." Li Yunyang quickly smiled apologetically and said, "Zhenren Zi Yuan? Sister Immortal? Please." Zi Yuan gave Li Yunyang a meaningful look, smiled, and followed Su Chan. In the end, she didn't say anything about Li Yunyang. Li Yunyang secretly wiped his cold sweat and thought to himself, Ziyuan is getting more and more difficult to deal with. The three of them were very strong, and they quickly went up the mountain. The asphalt road led straight to the top of the mountain, and it didn't take long for them to arrive at a huge archway. Li Yunyang looked at it with the help of the moonlight and saw a stone gate sitting on the road. It had cornices, bucket arches, glazed yellow tiles, a white low wall, 2 small doors on the left and right, and a big door in the middle. From right to left, the words Mount Gazao were written. On the stone pillars on the left and right of the door, there was a couplet written in traditional Chinese. On the right was, famous Taoist mountain Bizhang Qingjiang Zhong Xueqi. On the left was, holy land of medical sect spirit pills and miraculous medicines are rare. Li Yundong looked at the door and saw that it seemed to be newly built, but it was full of traces of wind and rain. There were weeds growing on the glazed tiles on the roof of the archway. Obviously, it lacked maintenance, especially the 2 iron fences on the small doors on both sides, which were even more rusty. The words on the travel notice blackboard on the right were also colorful and blurry. He couldn't help but be shocked. No matter what, the Gazao sect is a big sect of external alchemy. How could its signboard and gatehouse become like this? Ziyuan sighed slightly and said, "There's nothing I can do about it. The royal power is greater than the divine power." During the Song dynasty, there were more than 1,500 Taoist temples, more than 500 Taoist priests, and 3,000 acres of fertile land. The Taoists called it the Immortal Mansion. But at the end of the Qing dynasty, Mount Gazao, like Mount Longhu and other places, suffered repeated dangers. The incense of the Taoist temple, which had lasted for more than 1,600 years, finally declined. Especially after Wan Jinyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect, succeeded, he worked hard to move the sect's power out to the city. He corporatized the sect's power and turned it into an invisible force, but his own ancestral court declined beyond recognition. Su Chan looked up at the doorplate with the words, Mount Gazao, and sighed faintly. Yes, our Fox Zen school was also very glorious back then, but now it has withered beyond recognition. It can be seen that the rise and fall, victory and defeat, this is the reincarnation of fate. There's no other way. Li Yundong smiled and interrupted the 2 of them. Come on, let's go up the mountain first. The 3 of them quickly went up the mountain along the road. Along the way, they passed by the Bridge of Immortality, the Mountain Gate, the Heavenly Gate, the Mingshui Bridge, and other scenic spots. Although Li Yundong only took a quick look at them, these scenic spots full of vicissitudes of life still made him feel cold and lonely, especially the Mingshui Bridge. The mountain stream under the bridge was almost dry, and the riverbed stones were covered with moss and weeds. It was like a lonely old man sighing about the ruthlessness of time. Not long after, Li Yundong, Ziyuan, and Su Chan arrived at the gate of the main courtyard of the Gazao sect. They saw that it was a large square courtyard. At the main entrance was a gate with red walls and yellow tiles. The gate was divided into 2 floors. In the middle of the top floor and the bottom floor, there were 2 large golden characters on a green background. Below the 2 characters on a black background were majestically written, De Wanshou Chongzhen Palace. Although the signboard of the Taoist temple still looked very old, especially with weeds all over the top, these words were still majestic and brilliant, showing the world its former glory and prestige. Ziyuan sighed softly and said, There are countless Taoist temples in China, and there are also many with the name Chongzhen. However, there are so many Taoist temples in the country, but there is no one with the word Da in front of Chongzhen. It's a pity that the famous mountain of the Song dynasty has declined to this extent. Li Yundong smiled and said, Don't sigh. If you continue to sigh, be careful that your Linggong sect will become like them. Let's go in and see what's going on. If we waste too much time, we won't be able to find them later. As he said this, he was about to go in, but as soon as he was about to move, he was pulled back by Ziyuan. Ziyuan said with a solemn expression, Don't be careless. Although the Gazao sect has declined, it is only the ancestral court that has declined. In fact, the power of the Gazao sect in the mortal world is still very great. This is the holy land of the Gazao sect. Even a rotten ship has 3 nails. Don't be careless. Besides, a while ago, all the major sects fought on Gazao Mountain. It is impossible for the Gazao sect not to be prepared. It is very likely that there are magic circles inside. Let me cast a spell and find out what's going on first. Li Yundong nodded and turned to look at Su Chan, who had been leading the way. Can you be sure that the person has entered here? Su-chan snorted and said proudly, although I'm not good at fighting, my escaping and tracking skills are first class. I can feel that the aura of the person we are chasing has entered the great longevity Chongjin Palace. I can't be wrong. It's just that this person's aura is like that of Shibua Chao-yi and Shibua Zhuang Yuting. I can't tell which Shibua came here and why. 5. Chapter 370. Go to watch net. Li Yundong was a little confused. Since the people of Foxen School can go in, why can't I go in? Although he thought so in his heart, it was better to be safe than sorry. Li Yundong didn't stop Zi Yuan. He saw Zi Yuan take out a folded yellow paper talisman from her sleeve. After gently opening it, Li Yundong clearly recognized that it was a small yellow paper man. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Zi Yuan gently bit the tip of her finger and quickly wrote a blood talisman on the paper man. Then, without asking for Li Yundong's consent, she reached out and plucked a head from his head. Li Yundong let out a soft cry and said with widened eyes, "Why did you pluck my head?" Zi Yuan ignored him and blew gently. After a while, the paper man suddenly emitted a faint yellow light and automatically flew into the air. Not long after, it turned into Li Yundong's appearance. Li Yundong was stunned. What kind of magic is this? Su-chan clapped her hands gently and exclaimed, "Is this the Liujia Yang spirit talisman from the Liujia Heavenly Book?" Zi Yuan looked at Su-chan in surprise. You know about this? Su-chan chuckled. This magic is one of the 36 little magical powers that my master knows. I also know a little, but what I know is the Liujia Yang spirit talisman, which is not as vivid as yours. Hee, when I fought with my master and escaped from Uncle Master Emoashi. No, it was Yen Feng, I used the Liujia Yang spirit talisman. Zi Yuan smiled and said, with your spiritual energy, it's already amazing that you know the Liujia Yang spirit talisman. Su-chan giggled. I think this magic is fun, so I studied it hard. Other magic is not fun, so I can't use it well. Li Yundong smiled and tapped Su-chan's nose. You still have the nerve to say that? As he said this, he turned to Zi Yuan and said, why didn't you use your own head? Why did you use mine? Zi Yuan said lightly, you are more annoying. He turned his head and whispered to Su-chan, am I that annoying? Su-chan giggled and made a face at Li Yundong. She nodded vigorously and said, disgusting. So disgusting. He glared at Su-chan and said, fine, I'll deal with you when we get back. Little girl, if you don't get beaten for 3 days, you'll go to the roof and tear the tiles, right? The little girl rolled her eyes and held his arm with a smile. She said coquettishly, sir, you can't bear to part with me, can you? Your little girl is the most obedient. Zi Yuan saw that the two of them were so close to each other that they didn't care about the occasion at all. She said helplessly in a low voice, hey, do you think you're at home? Only then did Li Yundong and Su-chan react. They looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Li Yundong was thick-skinned and said to Zi Yuan with a cheeky smile, Zhenren Zi Yuan, please lead the way. Zi Yuan had never seen a person as thick-skinned as Li Yundong. She rolled her eyes at him and drove the Liujia Yang spirit talisman into the Taoist temple. Then, she followed the dummy about 10 meters behind. At this time, it was late at night, and the surroundings were frighteningly quiet. Only the sound of insects could be heard, and even the rustling sound of the dummy walking could be heard clearly. Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Su-chan followed the dummy inside for a while. Along the way, they hid in the shadows along the wall and walked slowly, while the dummy walked openly on the main road. They passed by the Taiji wall and the main hall. When they were walking to the side hall, they suddenly heard a faint conversation drifting over with the night wind. Although the voice was weak, Li Yundong could vaguely recognize that one of them was the voice of an old man, and the other was the deep voice of a middle-aged man. In particular, this old voice sounded particularly familiar to Li Yundong, as if he had heard it somewhere before. The old voice said slowly and hoarsely, how's your refining of the Dun Jindan going? A middle-aged man said, there's still one more herb missing. Aren't those 2 big golden snakes enough? Not enough. What else? Still. Before the voice finished speaking, Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Su-chan, who were listening attentively, saw a flash of white light in front of them at the same time. The dummy transformed from the Liujiayang spirit talisman, who was walking in front, suddenly had its neck cut by a sharp weapon. Then, the fake Li Yundong's head fell to the ground with a thud. Soon, the dummy transformed from the Liujiayang spirit talisman began to burn with a bang. Although the voice was soft, it was as loud as thunder in the dark night. The two voices that were talking immediately stopped. Li Yundong was so shocked that he felt a chill run down his spine. Li Yundong felt a lingering fear in his heart. He couldn't help touching his neck and secretly looked at Zi Yuan with admiration. He thought to himself, after all, she is the descendant of a famous family and has rich experience. If she hadn't been careful, I'm afraid my head would have been removed. I just don't know what kind of magical item it was just now. It was so fierce and domineering, so fierce and sudden. Zi Yuan opened her mouth and was about to speak, but her expression changed. She quickly took out another talisman and poured her Xueqi into it. Then, she wiped it in front of the three of them. Li Yundong immediately saw a flowing transparent light curtain appear around him. Su Chan whispered in surprise, "Nyan goddess seal." Li Yundong glanced at her and said in a low voice, "What seal?" Su Chan leaned close to Li Yundong's ear and whispered, "It's the invisibility talisman. We can see the people outside, but the people outside can't see us. It's also a talisman from the Liujia Heavenly Book." As she said this, the little girl proudly showed off, "I also know this magic." Only then did Li Yundong understand. He smiled and tapped Su Chan's nose. "Little girl, you know a lot of things. Not bad. Let me praise you." While the two of them were whispering to each other, Zi Yuan suddenly turned her head and made a gesture to keep quiet. "Don't make a sound." Li Yundong and Su Chan immediately shut their mouths. They stared at a figure pushing the door open and coming out of the side palace. This person looked like a woman with a graceful figure. She was carrying a lantern, and her figure was shrouded in a dim yellow candlelight. She was getting closer and closer. Li Yundong saw that the woman's upper body was shrouded in the darkness, so he couldn't recognize her face clearly. However, her figure was a little familiar. When she walked to the place where the dummy transformed from the Liujiayang spirit talisman had been killed, the woman stopped and looked around. She bent down and picked up a Liujiayang spirit talisman that had been burned. She raised the lantern and took a closer look. At this time, Li Yundong and Su Chan immediately saw the person's face clearly with the help of the moonlight. They saw that this person's face was coquettish and full of the aura of a prostitute. Who else could it be but the dead Main Yang? Su Chan was so shocked that she almost cried out. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes were wide open, as if she couldn't understand why Main Yang, who had once been dead, was now alive in front of her. Li Yundong was also stunned and thought in his heart, "Main Yang? That's impossible. Wasn't she sucked dry to death? How could she appear here alive? This can't be fake too, can it?" As soon as he thought of this, he saw Main Yang turn around and shout at the side hall, "There's no one here. It's just a half-burned talisman." Li Yundong heard that her voice was clear and loud. It was clearly the voice of Main Yang he had met before. Su Chan also moved closer to him and said in a low voice, "It's Main Yang. I remember this voice. It's Main Yang's voice." Li Yundong sucked in a breath of cold air. He felt that his mind was a little messy, but there was a faint light in the messy place, as if he had understood something. But when he thought about it, he felt that the light was surrounded by a thick fog of mystery, and he couldn't clear it even if he stretched out his hand to clear it. Just as Li Yundong was about to speak, he saw Zi Yuan turn her head and glare at Li Yundong. She made a gesture of silence and then transmitted her voice. "Are you tired of living? Don't speak." At this time, even if a needle falls, everyone can hear it. Li Yundong saw Zi Yuan glaring at him, so he also glared at Su Chan. Then he mouthed silently, "Did you hear that? I'm talking to you." Su Chan quickly covered her mouth with her hand and looked at Li Yundong eagerly. Her eyes were full of grievance. The little girl thought pitifully in her heart, "It's obvious that Sister Zi Yuan is glaring at you. Why are you scolding me?" While the little girl was thinking, she heard the deep voice of a middle-aged man coming from the wing room of the side hall. The man said loudly, "It's the middle of the night. I don't know which fellow Taoist has come to visit. Why don't you show up and meet us? Li Yundong didn't know how to transmit his voice, so he wrote on Zi Yuan's back with his hand. Should we show up? Zi Yuan rarely had skin contact with men. She only felt an itch on her back, and she was so uncomfortable that she wanted to twist her body to avoid Li Yundong's fingertips. She waited for Li Yundong to write a few times before she understood what he meant. She raised her hand and waved at him. Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan didn't agree. Although he felt strange in his heart, he also made up his mind to continue hiding. The three of them restrained their auras completely and didn't release any of it. The middle-aged man asked again. Seeing that no one responded, he sneered and said, "Those who dare to break into our Gazao sect at night must not be easy to deal with. Since you're here, why don't you dare to show up? Could it be that he's a tortoise?" The middle-aged man was trying to provoke him. Hearing this, Li Yundong was secretly unhappy. He thought to himself, so be it. We're just here to find someone, not to do anything bad. What's so shameful about it? But as soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw a figure suddenly appear in the dark starry sky. This person was holding a 3-feet-long Qing Feng sword. Her long hair fluttered like an immortal's, her figure was exquisite, and her face was as beautiful as jade. However, her eyebrows were sharp, making her look aggressive. Li Yundong took a look and was shocked. He saw that this person was none other than Yan Feng's out-of-body young spirit that he had seen on Mount Tianlong. The 3-feet-long Qing Feng sword in her hand was also the Liuha that he had once used. Su Chan was also so shocked that her mouth was wide open. Her face showed strong excitement and anger. She thought to herself, "Why is Yan Feng here? Where's my master? What did she do to my master?" Li Yundong and Su Chan were so shocked that their expressions changed, but Zi Yuan's face was as dark as water. She thought to herself, as I expected, Second Sherbo is hiding in the Fox Zen school. If I'm not mistaken, what Su Chan saw just now was Second Sherbo's figure. However, why did Second Sherbo come to the Gazao sect so late at night? Does she have any ulterior motives? While the three of them were thinking, on the main peak of another famous Taoist mountain, the Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling, suddenly opened her eyes and said with a stern expression, "What a madman! I've finally found your whereabouts." You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.